If you are not speaking, will you please?
I'll leave it red.
Perfect. Nope, I could probably speak loud.
Maurice, I think that was it. Sorry, the handheld broke.
So we're going to try this one more time. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's meeting of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. I am Mignon Moore, and I serve as the co-chair of this committee, alongside our distinguished colleague and long-serving chair, Jim Roosevelt. Before we embark on our work, please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mignon, and welcome to both our audience here in the hall at the DC Bar Association and our audience on the live stream. And welcome to all of you and us as Rules and Bylaws Committee members of the Democratic National Committee. This beautiful building that we're meeting in reminds me very much of the Boston Bar Association building, except that it was built 200 years ago and looks like it. This looks like it was built yesterday. So the next item on our agenda is the call of the roll. I do want to note for the record that this meeting is open to the public and will be live streamed both today and tomorrow and Friday, right?
Today and tomorrow.
Pardon me?
Today and tomorrow, yes.
Today and tomorrow. Please be sure to state your name before speaking to those listening remotely and for our court reporter. You will all likely have noticed that we are not joined by our stalwart parliamentarian, Helen McFadden, today. Helen was in a car accident a couple of days ago, and she's okay, but she's not able to join us because it was serious enough that she is having wrist surgery on Friday. We will have a card to sign in the next day or so, but please join me in our thanks today for the Maryland Dems parliamentarian, former DNC member Greg Pecoraro. Greg will assist us in any parliamentary matters, and I will now ask Veronica to call the roll.
Thank you. Can I start a microphone?
It works.
Excellent. Mr. Applebaum.
I'm here.
Ms. Blanco.
Presente.
Love that part. Ms. Brazil.
Here.
Mr. Brennan.
Present.
Mr. Burgos.
Presente.
Ms. Cardona. Mr. Curry.
Present.
Ms. Daughtry. Ms. Dowdell.
Present.
Mr. Alethi. Ms. Fowler.
Here.
Mr. Heredia,
Here.
Ms. Kmark. Here. Mr. Leone.
Here.
Ms. Lewis. Here. Mr. Locke. Ms. McGarrick.
Here.
Mr. Martin.
Here.
Ms. Martinez is not in attendance, and she has given her proxy to Artie Blanco. Mr. McDonald is also not in attendance, and he's given his proxy to Leah Daughtry. Mr. McGlinchey.
Here.
Mr. Mitchell. Ms. Mount. Mr. Ray. Mr. Saunders is not here. He's given his proxy to Randy Weingarten. Mr. Spite.
Here.
Ms. Swecker.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Weingarten. Here. Excellent. And Ms. Williams. Here. Excellent. We certainly have quorum.
Thank you very much, and we do indeed have a quorum. Under our charter and bylaws, a quorum is 40% or 13 members present in person or by proxy, and as you can see, we are way beyond that. Before we begin, I want to recognize the team who works behind the scenes to make sure our meetings run smoothly. We are joined by the Party Affairs staff. To my right, Director Veronica Martinez-Roman, Special Assistant Jenna Whitaker, and former Director and longtime advisor of the department and the party, Rick Boylan, who is also with us on the live stream because of an exposure to COVID, rather than here in person. The Secretary's Department also played a crucial role in the logistics of this meeting, so a big thank you to Director Jeannie Doherty, Deputy Director Brittany Korth, and Farah Sabir. I'd also like to thank Cody Voyles from the DNC's IT department and Alex Hornbrook from our convention team for supporting our meeting today, as well as many other members of the DNC staff. Our sincere thanks to everyone. As you will notice, we and the DC Bar are taking every possible precautions to permit us to meet in person and still be safe. We do have one member of our Rules and Bylaws Committee who's also participating by live stream because of an exposure. So with all of that on the record, I would like to turn it back to my wonderful co-chair, Mignon Moore.
Thank you, Jim. You have already the mic. Thank you. So again, I'd like to thank the staff for all their, pardon me?
Nope.
Oh,
No, are we ready for that, or shall we?
well, yeah.
Not quite, not quite.
Hello?
We got a couple more seconds.
Chair,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
You go ahead, Mignon.
So, and again, I'd like to thank the staff, and Jim and I would also like to thank the committee for all the hard work that they do and for the Rules and Bylaws Committee. We are committed to a thorough and transparent process, and that's meant many meetings this fall and this summer, as well as 3 virtual listening sessions and countless hours reviewing applications and testimony. We're also joined today by our eager chair, Mr. Jamie Harrison. Jamie will now offer a few words of welcome. Mr. Chair.
Folks, I want to welcome you all to this week's harvest. This week, we're going to hear presentations from each of the states and territories that have applied to be a part of our early primary scheme. Regardless of the outcome, I want to express how grateful I am that each and every one of these states and territories stepped. You all are putting in the time and the effort to demonstrate ways your communities embody their spirit. On behalf of the entire Democratic Party, to our RBC members, led by our co-chairs, Chef Roosevelt and Ron Moore, thank you for leading such an open, fair, and transparent process. Today, you'll hear from Nevada, Colorado, and Kansas. These states represent different parts of our nation and reflect the diversity of our country. I know you will give each of them a fair shot in your voice. Together, we'll make sure our party comes out of this process stronger than ever. With that, let's get the program underway. Thank you all for everything you do for the Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always great to hear from you. So today we'll begin our meeting with a discussion on delegate selection rules, specifically Rule 21 regarding enforcement of the rules. Then we will begin hearing state presentations and the timing of their nominating contests. Nevada, Colorado, and New Hampshire will be presenting tonight. Tomorrow, our day will begin at 8 a.m. sharp, and we will hear from the remaining states invited to present. There will be an hour break at noon, and we expect to adjourn at 6:30 p.m. For both days, states will have 15 minutes to present, followed by 20 minutes of questions for members. If you think of questions afterwards, we will be able to be in touch with all of the parties. We will determine the states participating in our early window at the August 5th and 6th meeting. I'll say that again. We will determine the states participating in the early window at the August 5th and 6th meeting. On Friday, we will continue drafting the 2024 delegate selection rules, non-technical portions, and will begin drafting the call for the convention. I'd like to invite Jim to discuss Rule 21 with us.
Thanks, Mignon. Before we get started with the main business on our agenda for today and tomorrow, Mignon and I wanted to have the committee talk about the provisions in our rules meant to ensure that every state plays by the same rules. As she stated in her welcome, we've deliberately built an inclusive process, and many states have participated with the understanding that the committee's decision, once voted upon by the full DNC, is final. Campaigns plan around our rules being final, and states work diligently to adhere to the plan. So as a body, we must be resolute in supporting our work by enforcing the rules. We always enforce the rules in terms of how we consider state delegate selection plans and how we consider implementation of those plans. We have, in the past, looking back about 3 or 4 cycles, had to sometimes take more drastic measures to enforce the rules. And we've learned more since then about how to do that in an effective and yet inclusive way. So that's what we will be working on this time, to be effective and inclusive. So let's get to looking at Rule 21. Rule 21, as written, provides us with automatic sanctions, as well as ample leeway as a committee to ensure adherence to the rules. I'll first explain a bit about the language as currently drafted, and then would welcome any thoughts from the committee on this section for 2024. Rule 21, dealing with challenges, primarily lays out what happens if a state's delegate selection plan is found in non-compliance with our rules. There are only 3 reasons why this Rules and Bylaws Committee would find a state in non-compliance. Violation of proportional representation, when a state plan provides for delegates and alternates to be allocated to presidential candidates using some non-proportional representation method, such as a winner-take-all system, for example. Secondly, violation of the threshold, when a state plan allows for something other than 15% to be used as the basis for determining what presidential candidates qualify to receive delegates. And thirdly, violation of timing, when a state plan provides that the state's first determining step will occur outside of the window that we will have established, or more specifically, prior to the window, in direct conflict with our rules. I suppose we might do that if they were after the window, but nobody ever does that, so we're not worried about that. While any of those 3 violations will cause a plan to be found in noncompliance, violation of timing is the one we've dealt with most over the years. Unfortunately, there have been times when a state legislature, along with the state party and or other elected officials, have decided they can set their own schedule for our nominating process. As a result, we have established a number of sanctions that we want to review with you, and then open discussion as to whether there should be any other enforcement steps that we should consider. When the Rules and Bylaws Committee finds that a state is in violation of one of those three primary rules, essential rules, Rule 21C1 provides for the automatic reduction of the state's delegates and alternates. This means that pledged delegates are reduced by 50% in each category, and the number of alternates is also reduced by 50%. In addition, no DNC member or any other automatic delegate is permitted to vote as a member of the delegation. Further, if a state is in violation of the timing provision of these rules, any presidential candidate who subsequently campaigns in that state is not eligible to receive any pledged delegates or delegate votes from that state. Candidates are allowed to campaign in the state after the primary or the caucus that violates the timing rule. For the purpose of this automatic sanction, campaigning includes purchasing advertising that reaches a significant percentage of voters in the state, hiring campaign workers, opening an office, making public appearances, holding news conferences, coordinating volunteer activities, sending mail other than fundraising requests, which are also sent to voters in other states, sending emails or establishing a state-specific website, holding events for voters, attending events sponsored by the state or local democratic organizations, or paying for campaign materials to be used in the state. That's how the rule presently defines campaigning. In addition to the reduction of delegates and alternates, the elimination of votes of automatic delegates, and the prohibition of campaigning by presidential candidates, Rule 21C5 and C6 allow the RBC to impose other sanctions on a state party, including further reducing the size of the delegation from the state, reducing in whole or in part the state's standing committee members, reducing in whole or in part the number of guests, VIP, and other credentials, and changing the assignment of the location of the delegation in the convention hall and its hotel. Those of you who have been to conventions know how important that sanction can be. Further, the RBC can establish a different committee responsible for proposing and implementing a process in the state that complies with the rules. So we could set up a separate process for selecting their delegates. Rule 21C7 allows the RBC to reduce all or a portion of the sanctions if the state party can prove by clear and convincing evidence that it and the other relevant Democratic Party leaders took all provable positive steps, acting in good faith, to bring the state law into compliance with the rules, and attempted to prevent the legislative changes that resulted in non-compliance with the rules. However, taking provable positive steps does not preclude a state party from being subject to the various sanctions as provided. Permits it, but it does not automatically preclude it. With that overview, I'd like to open up the floor for any discussion or questions about the enforcement provisions. Ms. Kmark.
Yeah, I want to talk about two things here that are kind of different. Section 2 and Section 3, okay, which is the allocation of delegates. It seems to me that the sanction there isn't really apropos, and we have a lot easier way to do this than reducing the size of the state's delegation. And I think we should, and for the following reason. Let's suppose the state decides out of it, that it wants to be winner take all, right? And it goes ahead and it says, I'm awarding all the delegates to the person who won the primary in my state. That will go into a delegate count or not. And under this rule, it would be the state's declaration of a delegate count. It would go into an overall delegate count. As we know, that creates momentum. The delegate count is critical as you move through a presidential race. It seems to me that we have a much easier way to do this, which is if the state violates either proportional representation or the threshold, the secretary of the DNC can simply decide that the votes will be allocated according to our rules and not to the way the state said them. Because you've got the same math, right? The math is there. You know the winners, you know the distribution by CD, you run it into the computers that everybody has now, and not when we wrote this a long time ago. You run it in there, and so you have basically the secretary of the DNC saying, candidate A from Nebraska wins this much, candidate B wins this much. And then you have a clear, then for the people who are counting the delegate count, it's clear that the DNC's count matters, not the state party's count. And you don't have to reduce the delegation, you don't have to do anything like that. It's just that they ain't gonna get to vote the way you're determining that they vote. And so I think you could do that for both 2 and 3 here, because both of them are simply different mathematical ways of allocating delegates.
So you're saying that what we could do is, rather than imposing a sanction, basically just impose our methodology.
Yeah.
And ignore what they say the way they say they're counting the,
Right.
counting the,
And just say, you
votes.
guys, and when, if you, for some reason you keep insisting on this, when we get to the convention, the secretary of the DNC, in recording the roll, will not accept the vote, should there be a vote. will
And
not
obviously
accept the
there'd be
vote.
lots of warning and announcement about that.
What? Say that again?
There would be lots of warning and announcement.
Lots of warning and announcement that, in fact, the vote from that state is going to be according to our math, not their math. And that's it. And I think that's cleaner all the way around. I don't think we've ever had a rule that really addressed this, and I don't actually think it's gonna happen. I don't know of any state that's thinking of doing this, but nonetheless.
But I think it's a very interesting observation, because not in our party, but state election officials are up for grabs in this election, in this 2022 election. And what some of them might attempt to do, given what they've already attempted to do,
That's right. They could, yeah, they
could
could
be,
fool around. They
could be
fool
the
around with
unexpected.
this. Yeah.
I think Jason had his hand up.
Jason, and then Molly.
I think that's a really interesting point, Elaine, because as our office goes through and certifies anyway, we're working with the state party and saying, oh, this isn't in compliance. We already worked through them. Try this again. Somebody.
I turned mine off.
But we already worked through each state party hand in hand with them, saying this doesn't match, this isn't right, you need to replace this is wrong here. So I don't see any issue with that. I mean, we're already doing that anyway with each delegation.
And the as you're moving through the process, the media is doing this. The media gets these things down exactly. They've got their computers, they've got the lines drawn by congressional districts, et cetera. And the reason this is so important before you get to the convention is that it's that momentum that the candidates seek. And after the first 4 or 5 contests, the momentum is determined by the delegate count. It's not determined by who's winning what state.
Molly, are you speaking on the same issue?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a question, as a former state party member, if the state digs in and says, we hear you, but we're sticking with winner take all, how would the delegate selection process works? I know the math works, but in terms of the people that actually represent those votes at the convention, I think we would have to contemplate what do we do if the state party says absolutely not? Are they then stripped? Does there still need to be a mechanism where, unless you do this as apportioned by the methodology, you can't have delegates at the convention?
I'm not sure we would have to go that far, because if we gave the secretary of the DNC the authority to cast a state's vote, if the state was in violation of our rules, then The only time we would get into trouble, and this is really get in the weeds, is if, in fact, we got to the point where we were actually canvassing delegations, right? And you had a fight, and the delegation said, no, we're giving all our votes to this candidate, and the secretary's office would say, no, you can't do that, that violates the rules. Then that could get messy, but that's way down the road, and I still think that the party rules would prevail in that instance, assuming that we've done all of this. So I think as long as we are specific about giving the secretary of the convention this authority, can I say this is?
Can I just say
yeah.
that? I think that would actually probably be resolved when the state party has to certify the delegates to the
Yeah.
secretary of the convention, or the secretary's office, before the convention. Then if there's a dispute, it would go to the credentials committee, and
Oh,
it
yeah,
would be
you're right.
resolved at that point.
That's right. And you know, I mean, Molly's got a point. They could still be holdouts, right? And they could still get to the convention and say, no, we believe in this. But I think by that time, there'd be sufficient precedent. By the way, this does have precedent at conventions because this is the way the Republicans have done this for 2 years now. They do not let the states report this. The secretary of the convention reports this. So don't let that prejudice you against the idea, but it is the way it's been done.
Okay. The tech folks have requested that we mention that if you have a phone or a computer that has an open microphone, that will also create feedback here. So just if you're aware of that. All right, who else? Yes, Frank, Leon.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, actually, I was gonna raise a similar point, or maybe the same point that Molly did. And so I think when it comes to the Credentials Committee, if the delegation that's put forth doesn't comply with the rule, then the Credentials Committee wouldn't see them, because I don't think we want people, you know, who aren't going along with the program sitting there. So, but I think it's an excellent idea. But I think putting in that enforcement mechanism at the end makes sense as well.
So any other comments or suggestions on enforcement provisions? Frank?
Yes, in terms of the candidate provisions, maybe I missed it. Don't our rules provide that campaigning includes allowing your name or seeking to have your name being put on the ballot? Because that should be something that we don't want candidates to do.
You're saying, do they currently
Right.
preclude seeking to have your name put on the ballot? I do not recall seeing that in the current rules. So that is an open topic for discussion.
Well,
here.
I think we should add that.
Elaine?
It's not in here, but I think that it makes perfect sense to add to this section B that candidates should be, or something like presidential candidates should be expected to withdraw their name from the ballot in a state whose delegate selection plan does not get approval. I think it's it's not quite campaigning, but I think it's critical to the enforcement power here.
I would include it in the definition of campaigning.
Would
It's
you?
putting your name in front of the voters. That's
Okay.
campaigning, to my way of thinking.
All right, it doesn't strike me as campaigning, but you can, I defer to the chairman.
All right. Thank you for that, Frank, and we will note it, and in a subsequent version, we will consider it.
Campaign would be the best place for it to be.
Yeah. Okay. So Donna's on my side. It wins. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Having lived through 2008, while there definitely are improvements that we could make in this provision, with a lot of angst, we actually increased the visibility and the, for lack of a better word, respect for following the rules in 2008. It's a whole new world after we actually did that, even though ultimately things didn't play out strictly as they would happen in a non-political world, let's put it that way. The point was made, it was a clear insistence on following the essence and the spirit of the rules adopted by this committee and the full DNC. It was, for those of you who were not present then and not involved in the process then, it was a major focus of attention beyond anything that you would expect, actually. The meeting where we imposed the sanctions was held at what was, I think, then called the Sheraton Washington and then the Marriott Wardman Park, and is now an apartment building.
Yeah.
And there were about 1,000 protesters in the streets outside on one side or the other, and a fair number inside who had gotten in before security went into effect, to the point that I personally had a police escort during the meeting. And it was broadcast live worldwide by CNN, believe it or not.
Never happens.
And indeed, during the meeting, we did, even though this was, now about 15 years ago, we did have cell phones at that point. And I started getting text messages from a Jesuit priest friend of mine who said, I'm watching your meeting from Rome. And in about an hour, he said, I'm praying for you. So, so
That's
it was
when you knew things were bad.
quite a dramatic meeting. Mo Alithi.
As we move forward and are thinking about this, I mean, I think there's two pieces to the equation, right? There's what enforcement mechanism we have with the states. But that goes so far. A lot of this depends on the candidates themselves and how willing they are to be a part of this. And so as we move forward, I do think that while we talk about how we enforce it with the states themselves, that we have a robust conversation about how to hold candidates accountable to whatever schedule we lay out. Some of it is outside the purview of this committee, but is within the purview of the DNC leadership, and to the effect, to the effect that we can, or that you can as the chairs, work with the DNC leadership on this. We talked about this briefly in our last meeting. Debates is a good example of this. And I think looking at enforcement mechanisms that say to the candidates, if you participate in campaigning outside of, in states that try to jump the line, there will be, the DNC leadership may impose other sanctions, such as not participating in debates. Again, outside of our purview, but if we can work with the DNC leadership, making some recommendations along those lines, having the candidates take this seriously is just as important as having the states take this seriously, and I think we need to give them incentives as well.
I think we'll work on language that encompasses that. Just to disclose my own particular point of view about that, what I would hope is we can come up with language that says that the sanctions imposed by these rules and enforced by the RBC are not exclusive of other sanctions that could be imposed by leadership of the DNC, so that we won't be saying that we put those in place, and indeed we preserve some flexibility to do what appears to be most effective at the time. And as is often true in politics, we might not know right now what would be. If by then the DNC has its own 24-hour cable channel or live stream channels, it's we've cut the cord or something. Access to that, for example. I'm just making that up, but whatever is effective at that time.
I think that's key, and I think that's a great approach. This is in part an appeal to the DNC leadership as much as anything else, that they look at the candidate side of this as much as they do, as much as we are.
You have the authority to do your part.
That's right.
Okay. Yes, Ms.
I
Brazil.
was gonna, as Mo was speaking, I was thinking about the 7, 8 presidential campaigns that I've been a part of. I'm sorry, folks, I've been around. And what candidates look for is certainty, at least the campaign manager. You want certainty, you want to know the calendar. The most important thing, you want to know the number of delegates needed in order to secure the nominations and any rule ballot access issues. So I think it's imperative that we spell out everything up front and put it in these rules and our regulations so that the candidates and the campaigns know what kind of strategy they have to deploy. And if they know up front that states that are not following our rules will not be able to succeed in being a part of the game. And I think that that's an incentive. We haven't had a lot of trouble, Jim, since 2008, and I was part of that. I didn't get security though, Jim. That's okay. I did find that there were back elevators and access to the hotel.
So as usual, you had your own creative solution.
Well, Jim, I didn't live to be this long without knowing how to get through alleys. But I would hope that everybody will appreciate where some of these concerns are coming from, because it was real. And the contest in 2008, in my humble opinion, and we have some veterans here, that was the closest we've come to having our party just break down. And it was the most competitive race in every state. Every state got to be a part of this process. So with that, I hope that we set out the right procedures up front so these candidates can soar, but as we all know, 2024, we have a candidate, so I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay, Ms. Fowler.
Thank you. I think I'm just backing up what Donna is saying and maybe asking you, could we do a little less flexibility in this? I think a problem with flexibility in politics is you leave this up to the DNC leadership and a candidate comes to them and says, oh, well, take it easy on me. I know you can do some more sanctions, but don't. I just think when we say, if you do this, this will happen, is so much more of a deterrent than if you say, if you do this, we're going to think of some bad things to do to you. I just think you ought not to have much discretion built into this, because in politics, we like to grant discretion to our friends.
What we might aim to do is to make it clear that DNC leadership is responsible to take steps to have campaigns follow these rules, and say, but also say that the sanctions here are not the exclusive way they could do that, something like that.
I think that's fine, but I think you have to have some definite things that are going to happen. If you do this, this is definitely going to happen. Otherwise, there will be daredevils.
Thank you. Okay. Any other, yes, Artie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of want to get a historical perspective. I mean, when was Rule 21 the way that it is written now? Was it written this way before 2008, or was it for that cycle, or were there touch-ups after the 2008 cycle? I was just kind of curious and thinking, is this the same language? When was the last time it's been updated, I guess?
I'm going to turn to Elaine for some institutional memory.
Yeah, it was Rule 19, which I keep getting, I still call it Rule 19. And then it was Rule 20, and now somehow it's become Rule 21. But it's been there as long as the delegate selection rules have been in effect. So it really goes back almost probably to 1976. And the first way it was written was to give the party some way to cope with states that had all Republican legislatures and could not come into compliance with our rules. That was sort of the genesis. That was the first version of it. over the years, it's expanded, and this is the most expansive that we've seen. And I think, as Jim indicated, in 2008, we really crossed a Rubicon in terms of being able to impact the presidential race from the Rules Committee and have some final sanctions over what the candidates were trying to do. Because before then, you know, there was a lot of chicanery around conventions and stuff like that. So this has been an evolving rule, but it's always been there because we always needed a way to deal with states that, for good reason, couldn't comply with the rules. I would like to, as we're getting to the end of this conversation, maybe yes, maybe no, add one thing that I think people...
Well, let me just say one thing first about what we've said already. I do think the rule, essentially as it now stands, has been in there, going back to 1976. You don't know until you actually apply language. So I think the language took on more meaning in 2008.
Yeah.
And we may have tweaked a word or two, but I think it's essentially what it was. And now we're looking at making sure that the message is very clear. We are going to enforce these rules, and we may do a little bit of revision this time, actual language revision, to make it clear, as Carol suggested, that we're not fooling around, and that we will not put up with, to use your word, chicanery.
Yeah, and I just want to make one last point for some of the committee and some of the audience. It is generally not understood how much authority the party has over its nomination system. And to do that, I'll go to one Democratic and one Republican instance. Our beloved Don Fowler, when he was party chairman in 1976, was able to take Lyndon LaRouche off the Massachusetts ballot, the New Hampshire ballot, by simply saying, this guy's not a Democrat, I'm the chairman of the committee, I don't deem him a Democrat. It, as you would expect, it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yep, he's right, a party has that authority. The same thing happened in Wisconsin with a young man who later became their governor, Governor Walker. When he was party chairman, he took David Duke off the Republican primary ballot, saying, this guy's not a Republican, we don't consider him one, and the courts upheld that decision. So the party chairman actually has a great deal of legal authority under the First Amendment, the freedom of association in the Constitution, to shape and determine this. And so I think, going to Carol's point and to Frank's point, the party chairman can take these rules and they can do, and he or she could do even more with them, as the case may be. And that is well established in the law, and it is well established in the First Amendment, freedom of association. So it's pretty powerful.
Thank you for that contribution. Anyone else? Okay, I think we are ready to move on to the next part of our meeting, and I understand the participants are ready for that. So Mignon, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. And thank you for that very vigorous discussion and always thoughtful discussion. We will now move to the state presentations, and we're beginning with Nevada, and they're entering the room. Each party will introduce themselves and their speakers. Parties have 15 minutes total for the presentation, as will be shown to them on the countdown clock at the front of the room, followed by 20 minutes of questions and answers from the members of the committee, moderated by the co-chairs. You can begin this presentation when you're ready, and we'd like to thank you on behalf of the Democratic National Committee and the Rules and Bylaws Committee for your preparation and coming here today to be before us. Thank you. The floor is all yours.
While materials are being handed out here, maybe I could just interject, Mignon. Sure. We've been asked, can Rules and Bylaws Committee members who are from a state under discussion participate in the discussion and eventually in voting? And the answer is yes, we have always permitted that. This is not a court with recusal and so on, even if recusal is properly understood as it is not by some members of the U.S. Supreme Court. This is a political process, and what's done here is open and public. And so it is, we know where people are coming from. We don't know what they're going to say, but we know where they're coming from, and that is part of the process.
Do you want us to turn it off? We're done.
So you can begin when you're ready.
By myself in this. Oh, was that? Thank you. My name is Judith Whitmer, and I serve as the chair of the Nevada State Democratic Party. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair Moore and Co-Chairman Roosevelt, and to the members of the Rules and Bylaws Committee. It's an honor to be here today with everyone to kick off your meeting with our presentation. As a diverse, accessible, and union-strong battleground state, Nevada represents the bright future of the Democratic Party. As I hope you will see today, our strengths are uniquely aligned with the RBC's goals in this process. Whether it's diversity, competitiveness, or feasibility, Nevada is the answer. We are here today not only to make our case for retaining our position as an early state, where we have demonstrated so much success the past 4 cycles. We are also here today to tell you why Nevada should host the first in the nation primary in 2024 and beyond. We're united in this push as one team. The state party, our elected officials, our partners in labor, and grassroots Democrats across Nevada. We're ready to be first, and we have the broad support we need to bring historic change to this primary process. I want to take a moment to introduce the rest of our presenters. Ivana Kinsella is Chief of Staff to Governor Sisolak, former state senator and former political director of Culinary Workers Union Local 226. She's also a DNC member. Clark County Commissioner William McCurdy is my predecessor for 2 terms as chair of the Nevada State Democratic Party. And Rebecca Lamb is a longtime Democratic strategist and former advisor to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. We are now going to play a short video for you that we feel really tells Nevada's story, and then I'll turn it over to Ivana. Thank you.
No matter where you were born. Well, what state do you call home? If you're a Democrat. You believe in a few simple truths. That our country works best when it works for everyone. That lifting people up means bringing people in. And that the more voices we amplify, the more we win. In this party, choosing a president to lead America should start with a state that looks like America. That was Harry Reid's vision 16 years ago. He knew then that his party would be strongest if the presidential journey began where everyone could participate. From rural farms and tribal communities to modern suburbs and booming city centers. Nevada is a state that looks like America today. But even more important, it looks like America tomorrow. The third most diverse state in the country, with the fifth highest share of Latinos and 40% growth among Black and AAPI communities in the past decade. Long shaped by unions. It's the leader in voting rights, with laws that are a model for the country. So working parents, hourly employees, people who can't easily get to the polls, can make themselves heard. Nevada is a battleground and a bellwether, a purple state that readies candidates to compete on the national stage. And has delivered for every Democratic nominee since 2008. It's small enough to campaign door to door and affordable enough for the long shots who deserve a real shot. For the party that looks like America, works like America, loves like America, votes like America. The party that will lead our country into the future. It's not movement. Tradition is not a good enough reason to preserve the status quo. Our country is changing. Our party is changing. The way we choose our nominee, that has to change too. And whether it does, it's up to you. It's up to you. It's up to you.
Right on. Thank you, Judith, and thank you, RBC members, for all of your hard work in this process. There are few states that can match Nevada's geographic diversity. We are the third largest metropolitan area in Las Vegas. We have the world's biggest little city in Reno, and beautiful towns across our 15 rural counties, all in one state. And that's the mix we need to compete and win in: urban, suburban, and rural. As a proud former member of the Culinary Workers Union Local 226, I can tell you organized labor is in Nevada's DNA. Nevada's union membership far exceeds the national average, and we outrate any of the other early states when it comes to union membership. And unions represent our diversity. Take the Culinary Union, for example. 60,000 members, the majority of whom are immigrant women of color who come from over 178 countries and whose membership speaks over 40 languages. While labor rights have been under attack across the country, Governor Sisolak and the democratically led legislature have ensured that we've increased our union power by passing collective bargaining laws and pro-worker policies. The labor movement is broad, strong, and politically active across the entire state. We have SEIU home healthcare and hospital workers caring for our most vulnerable, carpenters and iron workers rebuilding our infrastructure, IBEW workers installing our solar panels, teachers in our classrooms making sure our kids are learning, IATSE stage workers catering to some of the biggest world-class conventions, Teamster truck drivers and valet parkers moving people and resources across the Strip. And now, with state collective bargaining laws, AFSCME membership is on the rise. Nevada's also become a national model on how to strengthen our democracy through voter-friendly laws. We have some of the strongest voting laws in the country. About a year ago, Governor Sisolak signed a bill into law that that changed our presidential nomination process. We've moved from a party-run caucus to a state-run primary that will take place the first Tuesday in February in a presidential election year starting in 2024. Yes, we have a rich caucus history, but we made the decision to make the change so more people could participate and we could bring new voters into the process. When that primary takes place in 2024, we will have same-day voter registration, over 2 weeks of early voting, universal vote by mail, and vote centers that will allow a voter to cast a ballot in their home county so it's close to where they live and work. We've also made sure to take steps to increase voter access in our tribal nations, to make sure that drop box availability is available statewide, to expand voting access for those with disabilities, and to make sure that we are increasing voting rights. The bottom line is there's no other state that can match Nevada's commitment to voter access. And I'll turn it over now to my friend, Commissioner William McCurdy.
Thank you so much, Ivana, and thank you to the RBC for your diligent work on this process. Many states are going to make claims about the diversity, but the reality is Nevada is in a category of our own. We are a majority minority state with 52% people of color and the third most diverse state in the country. And the truth is, we are a microcosm of the country and a reflection of America's present and its future. We have both white working class and suburban voters. We're 48% white. We're nearly 30% Latino, more than 10% Black, and one of the fastest growing Asian and Pacific Islander populations in the country at nearly 10%. 27 different tribal communities. Nevada embodies the Democratic coalition we'll need to win national elections. And we cannot allow our party to focus solely on tradition at the expense of real representation. Since 2008, Nevada has opened the doors for all people of color to have real access to presidential candidates like never before. Voter education events in Tagalog, roundtables with dreamers and immigrant communities, community events with Black elected leaders at every level of the ballot. Courting this truly diverse population has made our party much stronger. As a former state party chair in 2018 and 2020, I can tell you that the path to 270 electoral votes runs right through Nevada. If you aren't winning my state, you aren't winning the presidency, or the House, or the Senate. Last cycle, Nevada was by far the closest battleground of current early states. President Biden won by just 2.4%. Nevada is fundamentally a purple state by every metric, but guess what? We've learned how to win, and we do it well. Under my tenure, Democrats reclaimed the governor's office. We flipped 5 of 6 statewide constitutional offices. We won both U.S. Senate seats, protected 3 of 4 House seats, and we won and secured majorities in our legislature. Democratic presidential nominees have won the state in 4 consecutive elections since 2008. And there is no question that Nevada's early status and the early Democratic investment and field organizing that comes with it is a crucial down payment for general election results. The infrastructure that presidential campaigns and the party bill for the primary helps us to win the White House in November, as you know. It also helps determine the majority in the House and in the Senate. Thanks to same-day caucus voter registration in 2008, 2016, and 2020, we added more than 60,000 new Democratic voters to the rolls in Nevada. Before our first early caucus in 2008, Republicans held a voter registration advantage. But since then, we have consistently maintained a statewide voter registration advantage. We can increase that even more with higher turnout in our first in the nation primary. And with Republicans gaining ground this cycle and increasing Democratic registration again, as you know, will be key to our success. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, William. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great, just checking. Thank you, William, and thank you to all of you for inviting us to be with you here today. 16 years ago, I was in a room like this for a similar Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting in New Orleans. Back then, Senator Reid asked us to come tell you a little bit about Nevada and to ask you to take a chance on us as an early state. You did. It was the right decision, and Nevada has delivered. Consistently running organized and accessible caucuses and securing general election victories every cycle. Before he died, Senator Reid called for Nevada to move from a caucus to a primary. He believed it was a fairer, more inclusive way for us to nominate presidents. And so we did, so that every Nevadan, whether you're Latino or Filipino, Black or white, urban or rural, have an equal opportunity to participate. We are here today asking you to trust us again. And I'm here, and Judith is here, and Ivana and William to all say that we are all in and fully prepared to host the first in the nation presidential primary and to deliver Nevada for Democrats again in November 2024. The RBC made a bold decision to buck tradition 16 years ago. And adding Nevada and South Carolina to the early window has undeniably benefited the party and our presidential candidates. But more change is needed to make this process truly align with our values as Democrats. The state that goes first matters. We all know it does. It fundamentally shapes the start of the primary and how candidates spend their time and resources in the off year. It creates momentum, and it sets the tone for the contests that follow. It elevates some candidates and not others. And that's why we believe it's so important for the first state to look like America. This process is first and foremost about finding a candidate who can build the coalitions to win the White House. Nevada is the place where you find out who can go the distance. When I look at the DNC's criteria, no state is in a better position to be first than Nevada. We don't just meet some of the criteria, we meet all of the criteria, whether it's our diversity, our geography, our unions, our competitive elections that are more and more competitive every cycle, our voting laws, our media markets, or the accessibility we have as a small state. Nevada is a clear choice. It's time that we have a primary process that isn't stuck in the past and tradition for tradition's sake, but that we deserve a primary that honors the future of our party and the future of our country. Thank you for trusting us then, and thank you for your time today and for the invitation to present. And I think with that, we are looking forward to your questions with 27 seconds left to go.
Thank you so much for that presentation. So we will open it up to the committee. Oh, I think Tony had his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have great respect for the state of Nevada. Artie is one of your great advocates. I've spent some time out there in various presidential races, and I understand your explanation and clear representation of diversity. But diversity also requires an investment, and in particular in the Latino community, which is not a monolithic community, as you know. It's a very diverse community within itself, and that investment is very important to how you get that 13%, I think the number was, to our higher level, so it wouldn't be so close like it was in 20. So I think if you can talk a little bit about your investment in the Latino community, how you want to grow that 13%.
Sure, I can take this one. Just for process purposes, do we need to reintroduce ourselves every time we speak? No, okay. I'm used to the legislature where you chime in every time. Thanks for the question. Great question. Comes up every cycle. I'm a Cuban from Miami and ended up in Las Vegas, and I understand that every Latino community is different. Every Latino community brings with it a richness of culture, of ideas, of history that we have to honor as we do our organizing. And when I got to Nevada in 2010, it was to work on then Senator Reid's race. And I would argue that that began really deep investment in the Latino community on behalf of the Democratic Party. And every cycle, and in between cycles, which is critical because it can't be work that gets done, dumped, and moved on from. It has to be learned from. The party has built on the lessons it's learned. We have developed incredible infrastructure in grassroots leaders that host everything from grand cultural moments in the form of gritos for Biden to really special community-led grassroots events to meet candidates that are representative of the communities that they serve. From the legislature to the city council, all the way to our statewide offices, we have Latino representation, and leveraging that with the organizing that we have learned from, that we continue to do and invest in, I believe we are distinctly prepared to meet the needs of organizing and winning in the Latino community.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I had the pleasure of being in Nevada for your caucus in 2020. Had a wonderful time. Always have a wonderful time in Nevada, actually. I commend you for moving to that process to a primary. Your presentation, several times you mentioned Nevada being first in the pre-window process. And if I understand the current legislation, Assembly Bill number 126 sets the primary date for February, the first Tuesday in February. My question is, if the DNC decides to include you in the pre-primary window, but not necessarily first, would you work with your state government to comply with that, so you wouldn't necessarily be first, but you would be in the window?
Well, we certainly hope that we don't have to change our legislative process. But in the event that we do have a Democratic trifecta. We have obviously the Assembly and the Senate, and we do hold the governor's office. So in a state like Nevada, we'll have the flexibility, I think, to really be able to do that if required.
Thank you.
Luis Heredia from Arizona, being one of only 3 members on this committee from the West. Can you explain a little, can you describe the impact to the West as a whole by having this as a first contest?
I am so glad you asked that question, actually, because this has been, even before the DNC saw opening an opportunity for a Western state to participate, Senator Reid had really been part of the process to try to elevate putting the West on the map, really, for presidential candidates. And if you think about where we are, both with the presidential and with Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, which we're so happy that Arizona joined those southwestern states in voting for a Democrat, but also adding 2 Senate seats in Arizona, and really being able to win these House districts up and down the ballot in these western states. But I think the wisdom of the DNC and the RBC committee, in 2006 to add a western state has really been, I think, helpful in drawing presidential candidates to the West, learning the issues. They are very distinct issues, just like they are in the Midwest or in the South. So we think that Nevada has really represented those issues well. I think the other thing that we, and it goes to what Ivana had talked about a little bit in terms of the Latino organizing. This is something that we've been doing in the state for a very long time. I don't have to tell you, that it's happening in Arizona, it's happening in Colorado, it's happening in New Mexico. And I think really having a presidential candidate, having the candidates early in the process and really understanding the community and learning to campaign in those communities has benefited the party tremendously. And I think that's part of, the argument for moving Nevada up in the calendar. This is a state that really looks like America, and it is in a class of its own in terms of the diversity, because it is really understanding how to win the support and mobilize the vote. And the Latino community and the AAPI community and the African American community, we are a state that has a breadth of diversity unlike most in America, actually.
Mr. Brazil?
Thank you so much. Outside of my hometown of New Orleans, there's probably no other city in America that really gives me the shakes. So, thank you for that. And I can explain that to young people later.
I'm gonna wear that with a badge of honor.
It's a good thing. I wish this was real. I'll go home with you. Okay? Because you know, it might be my lucky day. But since 2013, or when the Supreme Court gutted, the Justice Roberts Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act and Shelby v. Holder, has Nevada made any significant changes to its voting system that impact the ability of people of color? You mentioned diversity. And of course, and I'll start, you all say you have the gold standard, so this might be easy for the other states to understand if I ask the same question, or just put it in their statement. Tell us any changes, early voting, automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, felony re-enfranchisement, early age voting, any changes to the electoral system, such as access to polling stations. Have polling stations been a target of attacks by the opposition, which tends not to look for more access, but deny people access? Any changes in voter ID laws? And finally, since I know this is a stupid question for people who don't think like me sometime about politics, but is your primary system open or closed? And thank you again for your dynamic presentation and always treat me like a queen, although I'm a diva.
Okay, well, you are a queen.
Thank you, love.
So, I'm going to start, and then I think I'll have Ivana weigh in on this as well. I mean, the honest answer is we've done all of that, actually. We have taken full advantage of the fact that we have the Democratic trifecta, and we have really put an emphasis on moving towards voting rights laws that are as inclusive and accessible as possible. So to answer your question specifically, we have automatic voter registration. We have same-day registration. We have felon restoration. We have early vote. The early vote, we've always had a tradition of early vote in Nevada. I'm proud to say that that has been over a long period of time. But we have now added no absentee mail balloting so that every active registered voter in the state gets a mail ballot. And that happens early in October with a long period of being able to submit those. We also have voting centers, not just during early vote, but on election day. So if you show up at the wrong location, there is no such thing as a wrong location anymore. We feel like we have worked very closely over time with the election administration in the counties and have really professionally run efforts and professionally run elections in those counties. And with all of these changes, the governor and the legislature has funded much of the administration so that it's not just passing the laws, it's making sure that election administrators actually have the ability to administer them. Did I miss anything on the list, Ivana? Do you want to?
I don't think so, but
Okay.
I think to crystallize it, because we talk about policy, but what we have done in Nevada is localize it in a way so it really meets the needs of our state. We are a 24-hour state, and we have workers that work 24 hours. And so to give you an example of how these policies have been localized, we've worked with election registrars in all 17 counties to make sure that our early vote sites are places where people are actually going. It doesn't make sense to have an early vote site in the middle of nowhere if people are going to the grocery store all the time. So we have early vote sites at grocery stores. And the way it works in practice is if you're a shift worker, let's say you work day shift, you get off at 4, pick up your kids, you could go to the grocery store, not registered to vote, have an early vote location available to you, have your 18-year-old registered to vote right there with you, and then you can all shop for groceries having done your part to participate in our democracy. That is the level of granular work we have done to make voting accessible, meet the needs of the community, ensure that voting occurs where people are, and that we are equipped to give people as much information as possible about where those sites are and about how robust our policies are to ensure access. in Tagalog, English, and Spanish.
And that include also the Native American indigenous population as well?
Absolutely.
Access and no language barriers. I'm going back to another Supreme Court, again, knocking down many of the pillars of the Voting Rights Act. So I think it's important that we not only highlight the states that are doing the right thing in terms of increasing access, but also make sure that we continue to lift this up as a standard for the country. So thank you.
Molly? And then our chair has a question.
Thank you, Molly McGarrick from Delaware. It was a wonderful presentation. Question, I used to work at the state party, so my questions end up being sometimes a little more granular or nerdy. Obviously, the focus here is the presidential campaigns, but the decisions we make here have spillover effects on the rest of the ballot. I was just curious from a voter file perspective. Obviously, there's some leniency that's given to the early states around what they charge presidential campaigns. What do you all then charge other statewide races? Is it equivalent to what you charge for primary candidates, or is there a difference?
Judith, do you want to answer this question?
Sure. So for statewide candidates, what we've done is try to reduce the cost as much as possible. We also give discounts and waivers to some of our rural counties as well to encourage down ballot participation. We're doing a lot of work in our rural areas to give every opportunity for Democrats to start running in the areas where traditionally are Republican districts and Republican-held seats. So the pricing sometimes varies depending on whether it's urban or rural, and for a statewide race could be anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 for the governor's race.
Thank you for a very excellent presentation. And I have one question. You mentioned working with county election officials. Who is the highest state election official in Nevada?
I can take this one. It's the Secretary of State.
And is that a Democrat?
Currently, it's a Republican.
And is this a Republican that will respect the vote of the voters, or is this a Republican who won't?
So Barbara Sagaski is our current Secretary of State. She's actually been very easy to work with. She is termed out, so we are in an open contest now for the Secretary of State. It's a race that we intend to win.
That last part is what I was looking
Yeah,
for.
absolutely. Let me just say, this is one of our highest priorities in the state of Nevada. We absolutely, looking at what is happening across the country and the attacks that are on these election officials, we recognize how important this race is. We recognized it before. We're just in a place where we believe that we'll have a Democratic Secretary of State.
If you had told any of us 5 years ago that we would consider the election for Secretary of State to be at the top of our list of important elections, we would have said you were nuts.
I know.
And now I think that's true for all of us. Thank you.
I do have one quick question before Joanne. So you're going to a primary state. So what's your infrastructure now that you're going into a primary state? What's your resources, and how much resources is it requiring for you to make that switch?
That's an excellent question. As we move to a primary, it is a state-run election, obviously. So we are literally taking the caucus infrastructure and the state party infrastructure, and obviously that will be focused on preparing for the general election and preparing for a well-run delegate selection process, and it's something that we're all committed to working together to make sure that process runs very smoothly. But this will be a state-run election with all of the advantages, and it's part of why we're really excited about moving to a primary. When you think about same-day registration and early vote and the absentee mail, it just really gives every Nevadan an opportunity to participate in a way that caucuses were just more limited, and they're hard, they're difficult. Primaries are obviously difficult for the candidates too, and for the election administration, but we have a history in Nevada of very well-run elections, and so we're happy to be moving to a primary.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation, Joanne Dowdell. Is that better? Okay, thank you. have you had conversations with your Republican colleagues? What is their process going to look like, and are they going to be required to meet your statute?
So it's a great question. I will say that we have had ongoing conversations with our Republican counterparts over the years on this question. And what I will say is there hasn't been any indication that Republicans are going to move Nevada out of the early window. Now, they have joined the other, Republican chairs of the other states, the other early states, and I think, obviously the DNC and the RBC is going through this process. I don't know what the Republican process is going to look like once we are here. What I will say is that the law requires a presidential primary for both parties if there's more than one candidate. Now, they may choose to do a caucus to, do their delegate selection process, but the law does require a presidential primary for the Republicans as well. In terms of how that impacts us, we are already in an interesting position because Nevada has a different order. Nevada and South Carolina on the Republicans are flipped from us. So South Carolina actually goes before Nevada for the Republicans. So our system already doesn't exactly match. The order already doesn't match. So really, once we sort of determine where we are, once it's determined where we are in that process, obviously those are conversations we're very comfortable having with our Republican counterparts. I think everybody in Nevada, and Republicans, Democrats alike, know how important this early nominating opportunity is.
Ken?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ken Martin from Minnesota. First off, William, so great to see you, brother. And thanks for the wonderful presentation. Two quick questions. Can someone explain to me, there's two big counties in Nevada, of course, Clark and Washoe. How often in the past did presidential candidates campaign outside of those counties? And the second question, and excuse my ignorance here, but I would assume that early January or even mid-January is going to see a higher amount of tourists coming to Las Vegas, presumably than later in the cycle, February, et cetera. I know that hasn't posed any challenges for you in the past, but is my assumption right that January would probably be one of the busier times for Las Vegas and Clark County versus maybe a February, March?
I can easily say that I think the Nevada infrastructure in terms of handling the capacity, we want more and more people to come. So we're excited to have folks whenever they come. I'm going to hand it off to William to talk a little bit about the presidential candidates and the opportunities that we've seen them take in rural Nevada.
It's a great question. Based off who Nevada is and what we do in Clark County specifically, we see upwards of 45 million visitors annually. So seeing a high influx of folks, coming to Las Vegas particularly is no new feat. It's something that we do. It's something that we do well, being essentially the world's arena, if you will. There is always a desire for when candidates come to Las Vegas, or come to Nevada rather, they take a quick hour and 15-minute flight up to northern Nevada, and they hold events and they work out well. It allows them to see the diversity of not only Nevada, but our economic situation. There's a different voter in northern Nevada than it is in southern Nevada. And by the way, as you've already learned, we have two very inexpensive media markets, which is advantageous for the candidates. So it would be more than beneficial for Nevada to be first, but also be particularly cost effective for the candidates as well. And by the way, we're right next door to California, and hop and skip away from Arizona as well. So I think, to answer your question, yes, we can handle capacity. Yes, this is what we do it well. And our entire economy is based off visitation, so we would open them with welcome arms.
Yeah. Just to add on the rural piece, last election cycle, Pete Buttigieg, then I guess Mayor Buttigieg, now Secretary Buttigieg, had an office in Elko because he recognized the importance of reaching out to all Nevada. And we can go through and list out examples of other candidates and their visits to the rurals. Usually it was in line with our rural Democrats who are active and excited and doing really good work in places like Winnemucca, which just hosted its first Pride Festival. We are activating more and more Democrats across the rurals, making them a place where we see statewide candidates campaigning and where we see more and more Democrats stepping up and running in what are traditionally Republican-held areas and chopping into those margins in a big way.
I'd like to add just one thing to that. We have worked really hard over the past year to build up our rural county parties, and we have very active, very strong county parties in all of our rural communities as well. That are very active, that are very good at turning out the vote in those areas as well, and were very active during the 2020 campaign. So we expect that strong tradition to only get better and to increase in the coming years. So thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Mo?
Thank you. And thanks for the outstanding presentation. I want to piggyback on the question that Molly asked earlier, because one of the themes that several members of this committee have discussed throughout our process so far is keeping the process as accessible to all the presidential candidates as possible, particularly those who aren't as well known. My understanding is that the current early states, Nevada included, sell their data to the presidential campaign separately, and that the presidential candidates have to pay a lot more for early state data than they do for any other. So my question to you is how you would intend to help ease that burden on the campaigns, particularly the lesser known candidates. But how are you going to approach that moving forward, should you stay in the early window or even go first?
Judith, you want to answer that one?
Sure. I know that we've already had these discussions with the DNC during the process of the voter file swap agreement. The early states chose to kick that option down the road. There was an option to change the negotiating process during presidential campaigns, which we were very open to. Making some changes in that regard, and I know at this point states sort of set that bar as to what they're negotiating, what the fees are, what the costs are per state directly with the presidential campaign. The DNC has already had those discussions with the early states about making some changes to that, and I think all the early states at the time were very receptive. It's just a matter of they were working out the logistics and the details on it.
Randy?
Can you hear me? I don't mean this question to sound as dark as it's about to sound. But because it's, as so many of my colleagues have said, it's an amazing presentation in an amazing state with all the things that you all said. And you have used elections to really change voter access. So say for a moment, we lose a lot in November 2022, and a new state government attempts to do what Texas or Florida has done. What is the party prepared to do the kind of things to create the access that you now have in statute?
So let me speak to the question, and then we'll talk through what the party's prepared to do. But the question is, it's a great one, and I would love to be pithy and say that's not going to happen. But I think we have to, be very eyes wide open. And what I will say though is that the way that the legislature is now oriented, even if we were to lose at a statewide level, we believe that we will hold the legislature. So that's the first thing that I think is really important for all of us to sort of recognize. It's very difficult to change the law unless you have the legislature. So from that perspective, I feel like we are in as strong a position as any state. The second thing I would say is that we have been maybe overly litigious at times when we see election officials restricting voter access. We are very quick to make sure we are at the table and fighting those, gathering the resources to make sure we have the ability to do that. When it comes to ballot measures that the other side likes to play around with in Nevada, we've beaten 3 down so far this cycle. And we're just very aggressive when it comes to protecting the election access that we have worked hard to build. And so, you know, I don't want to, you know, overstate it, but I do feel can say very confidently that we feel like we're in a very strong position. Even back in, you know, we had a situation where Republicans briefly controlled. They opened a debate about voter ID. We were actually able to prevent that from becoming law at the time. So just to try to assure you, you know, it's the kind of state where we think we can do a lot to protect the right to vote. We've made huge gains, and we have no intention of seeing those turn back. William?
And one thing that we've done particularly well is build coalitions. In Nevada, as we articulated within our presentation, is that we have done significant work delivering on behalf of working class Nevadans, which include our progressive partners, our union partners. And guess what? Democrats have improved the lives of those who are within the state of Nevada, which means that whenever there is a possibility for an attack on anything that we've made progress on, coming from a labor background, both Ivana and I, we have come up with this slogan, said never again. And so what that means is that we're talking to one another month in and month out, checking in about what's happening, what could happen, and how we are going to be able to strategically position ourselves in alignment to fight back any attacks that may come that will prevent us from moving forward with all that we have done. So that's another benefit of Nevada and what it is that we have done with the infrastructure that has been laid for us since 2008. So that's just one more example to show to you and present to you in this manner of how we have aligned ourselves with an entire coalition across the state to combat anything that may come up that will prevent us from continuing to make progress.
Thank you, and thank you, Nevada, for such an excellent presentation and answering all the questions. If we see no further questions, we're going to take a few minutes and let Colorado come in. And again, thank you so much.
right, we are back in session. We will now hear from the Democratic Party of Colorado.
Good afternoon, or it's almost evening out here, I guess. Thank you for having me here, my esteemed colleagues here at the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. I appreciate your time here. I'm here to make the case for Colorado to be an early state pre-window nominator. Next slide, please. So we want to, why Colorado? That's one of the most important things. I mean, we want to talk about voter turnouts. We're one of the highest voter turnouts in the state. Voting rights and protection. We have some of the best, as Jenna Griswold would call it, the gold standard in voter protection and voter rights and the way we handle our ballots. We have progressive election and voting laws. Colorado's diversity. It is undersold, and probably most people don't understand how diverse the state of Colorado is, not just ethnically and culturally, but geographically, economically, industrial, and many other facets that we'll go into. Better equipped candidates, you know, I myself in the chair and most of our initiatives work across the state and prep our candidates to go out and build winning elections, because all elections are local and it starts from the bottom up, and we believe winning local wins big. Fresh voters, fresh perspective. We have people coming from all across the state. We have lots of transplant, but we also have a lot of homegrown voters that are siloed away from some of the different kinds of trends that we see outside of the state, and a good mixture of it. And then last, we just have so many outreach initiatives, which, you know, it's similar in the DNC, we would call them caucuses and councils, but in our state of Colorado, we call them initiatives, and we have 16 of them that actually actively engage with the state party leadership, including myself, and many others, to do more and more outreach, to do actual engagement, so that when it comes time to vote, we're not doing Go TV. We're actually just reminding them who's sticking up for their values. Next slide, please. All right, so back to that diversity. Racial diversity is something that I'm really, really proud of in Colorado. We have 3 of the most racially diverse cities in the country. Coincidentally, they're also 3 of the largest cities in our country as well. But with Aurora, Denver, and Colorado Springs in that order, the amount of ethnic and cultural diversity there is pretty amazing. Now, Aurora is the one I want to highlight. Aurora is one of the highest immigrant-based populations in the country. 20% of its population were born from another country. Not only that, 160 languages are spoken in Aurora. It's just fascinating, the amount of people that come into Aurora that are from out of the country. They've come here and say this is their place, that we want to build a home. It's also rated one of the highest immigrant services cities in the country as well. 22% of Colorado's population is Latinx, and it's only growing. We have 5% Black and African American, and inside 17 to 17% in the cities with the highest population of our Black population. Next slide, please. Now I want to talk about the landscape and the regional diversity. It's something that most people don't understand. Colorado has 64 counties. It's more than California, so a little bit too much on counties, but they're pretty evenly divided, with the 17 urban counties, 24 rural, and 23 frontier. Now, most people don't know what frontier is. Frontier is a county with a very, very, very sparse population that is very remote from accesses like health care and a lot of these population services that you'll see in more urban and even some of the rural areas. Colorado has one of the largest rural and agricultural states in the country. About half of our land is dedicated to ag. We have both farm agricultural and rural area, and we have mountain rural. Some of those are frontier. So those It's not your tractor road, it's not your corn, it's not your big ag, it's not your big farmland rural. It's rural in the mountains. Similar to if you go to the East Coast, you see the Appalachian rurals. So we have that diverse amount of landscape within our state. And inside of that rural, we actually have a high number of mountain resorts. So we have a kind of like a city center, a little city center with the tourism placed inside of those mountain rural areas. One of the interesting things that people don't know about our state, 81.4% of our agriculture is individually owned. Only 8% is corporate. So when we have someone come out here and we come and campaign, if we have our presidentials come here, you actually get the actual voters. You're not fighting the money of corporate farming. You're actually gonna have the eyes and ears of individually owned farms. I talk to them all the time. I go down to La Junta and to Pueblo, and we talk to their values, and we speak to their water rights and their media and their broadband issues, and they have a stronger presence in the voting bloc than you would if you had a lot of corporate farms. As a matter of fact, Weld County is one of the top 10 counties in this country for agriculture that's not in California. Next slide, please. Now I want to talk about political diversity. Our voter base is split not quite even, but almost evenly among unaffiliated, Democrat, and Republicans. Unaffiliated are the number one by a lot. About 400 to 500,000 more voters are unaffiliated than there are Democrats, and Democrats about 100K more than Republicans. But those are the swing voters that we can actually win, and that gets that attention when the president comes to our state. Those are the people that says, hey, they actually care about us. And the unaffiliated voters are only increasing by the day, and we need to win those. And I feel that the Colorado unaffiliated voters are such a great bellwether for the rest of the country. We have economic diversity. As I mentioned before, Colorado was ranked 6th best by Wallet Hub, and we are emerging in areas of IT and biotech. But that's not our main one. If you look at our largest industry, it's actually manufacturing, mining, agricultural, and services. So if you go down to Pueblo, that's the home of the heroes. That's a steel city. It's a high manufacturing blue-collar area. And so we still have a lot of the old blue-collar workers. People kind of think Colorado is, you know, ski resorts, and then you think Denver, which tech is booming there, but actually that's still not our largest. And our largest service is actually tourism. Tourism is a huge booming economy, and we actually have one of the largest growing corporate tourism, where other companies want to go, they come to Colorado, and they have their company events. Next slide, please. Age representation is something else that I think we are the bellwether. We are right there with the national average. If you look across the United States, 4.1% of our population are college students, are young voters. Colorado is just a little bit above that, a little hair over 4.1%, which again serves to tell you that we represent the whole country. Our diverse population is very much in tune with how the rest of this country looks like. When it comes to veterans and military installations, Colorado has the 11th most populated military personnel. And we have 20 bases, which is right at the average of how many bases we have across the United States in every state and territory. Next slide, please. We have diversity within our party leadership. Almost every single member of our leadership has a different diverse background, whether it be LGBTQ+, whether it be an immigrant like myself, or an Asian like myself, or a chair who is Jewish, or our second vice chair who is Black and African American, or Radhika who is South Asian, and Joe Salazar, our DNC elected, is Latino and indigenous. We have prided ourselves in not just only electing leaders that look like us in public, but also in our state party. We want them to understand that all of us represent Colorado and the rest of the country. Next slide, please. Here's the 16 initiatives that, again, I put in parentheses, caucus and councils like we would have at the DNC. We actively have 16 working to do the engagement in all the diverse areas that you see there, whether it's the African diaspora, the AAPI, disability, education, energy, rural, senior, South Asian, Stonewall, LGBT, which is the LGBT plus population, veterans, women's, young Dems. We have not left a single part of that diversity out in our outreach efforts, and they mostly work with our leadership. We pride ourselves in our ability to have so many different leaders in the state that are concentrated on working on engagement, community outreach within all our different diverse population. Next slide, please. So, I mean, let's talk about this again. Why Colorado? I think if you look at Colorado's ability to drive a momentum, an earlier positive narrative, it's going to bring that, it's going to showcase that nationally. When you look at Colorado, it's voted for president for the last 4 cycles, and so voted for the winning candidate 5 out of the last 6 presidents. We have voted Democrat for governor since 2006. 4 of the 5 last senators from Colorado have been Democrats. And we've actually delivered wins beyond our political makeup of the state. And what I mean by that is, if you look at our demographics, that's what you can tell. When I look at demographics, I can tell how most of those voter bases will go. We've actually always exceeded our expectation on how our state votes because we've had the grassroots, we had the organizing. Colorado was reliably red until 2004. And because of the organization that we've done, grassroots, at the state party, and other organizations, we've actually effectively changed that whole narrative. Next slide, please. So here's the gains. We've won 100% of our statewide offices for the first time in 82 years, in 2018. We won Secretary of State, Jen Griswold, Attorney General Phil Weiser, Dave Young, and then we've already had the aforementioned with Governor since 2006. We've also won the majority of CU regents, which I'm not sure if most states have it, but the CU regents, which is the Colorado Education University, the Colorado University Education System, they're voted in our state, and they actually control the budget of the largest employer in the state. And so we've taken that and we've turned that blue for the first time in 40 years. We've also won the majority of State Board of Education in 2016. We've gained the majority in the legislative chamber in 2004 for the first time in 50 years. And we've held the majority in House since 12 and the Senate in 18. Our voter turnout has been the second highest in the nation in 2018 and 2020, excuse me. And that's probably most likely because of our gold standard of voter protection laws, our same-day registration, our automatic voter when you get an ID or license, our increased drop box, including tribal areas. We've actually put more boxes on tribal areas than ever in the history of Colorado. We've made it so much easier to vote. Next slide, please. Now, these seats have the potential to be lost. If you look at our county seats, a lot of them are still held by Republicans, and we are having the wind in our face when it comes to the new CD8. It leans Trump voters. We're not talking Republican voters, but people who actually voted Trump. And there's a difference, obviously. And we need to hold that seat. The redistricting has also made CD7 a little bit more difficult. The seat that used to be held by Congressman Ed Perlmutter, is going to retire, and so we don't have that incumbency to help us with it. So having that early state momentum, having that excitement, having that presidential go through us can help secure our congressional seats that we need to hold. You know, having the majority in the House, Senate, State Board, all 4 seats in a very vital swing state has allowed us to kind of pass some of the most progressive and democratic value-based bills. You know, when you talk about a lot of the police reform bills that's been going across the country, when you're talking about a lot of the environmental crisis that we got going on. It has helped us do that, and having the presidential come through Colorado can only keep that, because we need to defend that seat. We need to defend every piece that we've gained in the last 2 to 3 cycles. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, Jenna Griswold is our Secretary of State and the chair of DAS, and she fully supports Colorado being one of our pre-window nominating states. We've had letters from Steve Fenberg, our NAACP, our Working Families Party. I'm not going to go through that list. I know you guys seen that in the application. But, you know, I was talking to Governor Hickenlooper. I'm sorry, he was former governor and now Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett, and they both believe that we should start with Colorado as the bellwether for the rest of this country. We have that makeup. Next slide, please. So the feasibility, which is another part of what we talked about in the new RBC bylaws with it. I think Colorado is such a good state to campaign in. You can cover the whole state basically in 7 geographical points. When you talk about north, when I said Weld County, the largest agricultural, you can get so much of the agricultural vote in a lot of the rural areas. You go down to Denver, Boulder, Aurora, you have the biggest urban population in the state. You go to Colorado Springs, which is the biggest military installment in our state, and you have new tech coming out of there. You go down to Pueblo, which is dubbed home of the heroes. That is the blue-collar worker. You have a lot of bordering communities there that are very big ag, rural, and frontier. And that's going down I-25 corridor. And then the other 3 is going down I-70, which is fairly simple. You go down to Summit County. That is the mountain rural that is also sprinkled with world-class ski resorts. And so they have a different dichotomy than if you had some other mountain rural area, because they have so much tourism, they have so much business, so much of the, almost nearly $1 billion of tourism comes through Colorado every year. You go down further to Eagle County, and that's when you start getting away from most of the resorts, and you now focus on a lot of the blue-collar mountain areas. And then you end up in Grand Junction / Montrose area, and you will have the complete landscape of our state from all the different industries, from manufacturing, from mining, from tourism, from services, from tech, from big agriculture, most of them individually owned. You can cover that fairly quickly and very easily. We only have really 3 media markets inside the state. The Albuquerque market kind of covers parts of Colorado, but you really have 3, so it's less to spend money in. So you can it's very, very feasible to kind of put a good bang for your buck, as I call it, when it comes to media spending. The convenient path makes it so easy for candidates just to come down here and say, we can do it. Like, it's almost like a cross. You're crossing your T, and that's how you do Colorado. And we're not like a huge state, so it's easy to cover. It's not too big to cover, but we also have enough electoral votes where it can build that momentum. And as I laid out with our diversity, with those type of diverse voters, it will clearly be the barometer of the rest of this country. Next slide, please.
Howard, we need to move on to the Q&A.
Okay, all right. Next slide, please. I also want to just really quickly, core democratic issues for the Colorado voters. We're at the front lines of the effects of the environmental crisis with fracking, oil and gas, orphan wells. There's 40,000 wells at any given point. I already mentioned the voting rights. We're the epicenter of mass shooting and gun violence. As you know, it started in Columbine. It's Aurora, it's Boulder. We see it. I had my own kids in my own county affected by STEM shooting in Douglas County. And then we also are one of the leaders in social justice and accountability by coming out with some really progressive bills, SB 217 in a couple of years back. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Sorry for taking up extra time.
Impressive
Chair.
presentation. So we can now go to questions and answers. Yes.
Hey, good to see you again.
I have a question for you. You talked about
This
your
is
initiatives.
Yvette Lewis.
I'm sorry. I should have said my name. I just assumed. How arrogant. I'm Yvette Lewis. Please forgive me. When you talked about your initiatives, you had several groups that were listed. Do they have members of those groups? How many members of each group? Hold on.
Sorry.
How active are they? I mean, what types of outreach do they do? Just a ballpark of, what you have.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So it depends on the one. So the South Asian is fairly new, so they may have 30 to 40 members within that initiative. They go out into their community and they work to develop a voter base, number one, and number two, to actually have them recruit leaders also into the Democratic Party. Most of them are fairly active. I would say 90% of them are constantly doing some kind of work at any given point. We at the state party facilitate a lot of that too. So if you look at like AAPI, we have Dragon Boat. If it's Holly for the South Asians. Last week we worked with the African American Caucus for Juneteenth. This coming weekend we're working with the Stonewall for Pride Parade. So we are very active with all the things that goes on in the state, and the top leadership works very diligently and very closely to make sure that we cover every single one of those.
Susan Swecker.
Hey Howard, it's
Hey,
nice to see you, and you're really brave to be up there by yourself and to do all of this. But I have a question about the unaffiliated voter. So you have a primary, and then the unaffiliated voter, can they go in that day and switch their registration and then switch it back? Or just tell me a little bit about how that would work in the primary process.
Unaffiliated voters can decide which primary they want to engage in. So they don't have to switch anything. It became law that unaffiliated voters can actually participate in either Democrat or Republican primaries. They cannot participate in both. If they participate in both will be null and void. So yeah, they don't have to change the registration. They just go in and decide what primary they want to vote in.
Thank you, Frank Leon.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Does Colorado have all mail-in voting, or is it a combination of mail-in and in-person? And if it's all mail-in, which I think it is, how long does it take to count all those votes? If you have a primary on Tuesday, when would you get all those votes counted?
We actually still have polling centers, so you can actually still go in person and vote. But majority of our voters do turn in a ballot because we have offered so many drop boxes. Especially, we've now increased our numbers in communities of color where most of them have double jobs or a lot of needs, a lot of handicap needs, a lot of senior needs, a lot of kids with special needs. We have increased that. It depends on how close the race is on the counting. They actually start process, I believe they actually get everything ready when they are all turned in, and they start processing the minute voting day happens. And so you can get your first data drop within the afternoon. And most of them, if they're not within 2 points, we can know the victor fairly quickly.
Molly McGark.
Hi, Molly McGarrick from Delaware. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question around voter file access. States that are in the early window have more flexibility around pricing to the presidential campaigns. Do you know if you intend to increase your prices from where they are currently if you are selected? So that's part one. And then part two is, would you pull the other statewide candidate pricing up to match the presidential? Or how would you envision handling voter file access costs for statewide non-presidential candidates, again, if selected for the early window?
I would say no, we shouldn't increase that price at all. But I'm not sure I can answer the second one. You said bring other candidates?
It's obviously the work here today is mostly focused around presidential campaigns, but
Exactly.
just worried about spillover effects. The scope of presidential campaigns, budgets, et cetera, are larger. Just want to make sure that we're not potentially causing impacts on statewide candidates who then could see pricing increase exponentially.
No, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Actually, and that's great. We have a weird, kind of like a hybrid in Colorado. When the presidential primary happens, it actually happens earlier. We actually still caucus for everybody else, and they still get on a different primary in June, and then it goes to the full general in November. So on a presidential, you might have 4 different rounds of almost voting at some point. You get the caucus to get onto the ballot, and then you have the primary to determine who goes into the general. And so the presidential would actually be separate from the lower candidates. So the timing of that should not affect that high pricing should not be added on to a lot of the other local candidates and other state candidates. It's at a different time.
Scott Brennan.
Thank you, and very nice job, and it's got to be very lonely. Can you talk a little bit about Colorado's redistricting process?
Yes, the Colorado redistricting process was done by an independent committee made up of equal number of Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated voters. We went through a process of which was put in law the last time, a few years ago. I can't remember which session we actually put it in. And what they did was they had the maps drawn based on all the testimony given across the state. I can't remember exactly how many numbers of testimony they put out, but it was drawn based on this independent commission. And obviously the congressional had to go by it to the last population. That's obviously something that couldn't, but they looked at the political climate. They looked at the growing population, because Colorado is growing at one of the fastest rate. I think it's about 10% or maybe even higher. And they had to look into that. And then the committee themselves had to, all of them had to vote to get that. And then I believe the staffers got the first map in, and then when that was pushed through with some comment, we then pushed back on that. And then the Colorado Supreme Court actually looks at the last one and says, hey, if they reject it, it goes back to the previous one. So that's the process that we use through. We have an independent commission.
Antonio Burgos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Howard, good presentation. You know, Colorado has a rich history of Latino engagement. You had Federico Peña as mayor of Denver. You had Ken Salazar as Attorney General, then U.S. Senator John Salazar's brother as a member of Congress. But and Ramona Martinez, a former member of this body, as council president, and a host of other people. I don't see that in your mix of diversity as much as we used to see it, and that would be a very important concern. And then second to that, on your mail-in voting, and you keep the polling sites open, what kind of an investment do you make in getting Latino voters educated enough to use the mail vote, as opposed to showing up at sites on the day of the election?
That's a good question. So is the first one a question, or was that just a concern?
What was that?
The first
No,
one.
I was just expressing a concern about.
Gotcha.
You had this great diversity of people elected around the state. Now you don't see that.
Understood. No, that is a good concern. We are working towards recruiting leadership. Not everybody is made to campaign, as you know. It takes its toll on it. But that's one of the reasons why our initiatives are out there, not just to engage voters, but we're looking at the grassroots people that are making things done, the people that are going into, Colorado is one of the few states that you can actually be a citizen lobbyist and testify for every bill. And when we do that, we actually go and recruit some people that do a great job of that and try to get them into elected office. So that's one of our primary goals at the Democratic Party in Colorado. To answer the second part, have we actually talked? Yes, we've been putting out things in Spanish. We've been putting out things in other languages to try to educate a lot, especially like you would think of in Aurora. When you think about Western Slopes, we have actually growing Latin community that we need to do more outreach. And we've been spending money on Spanish type of education. We're trying to get into the airwaves. That's another thing that we're looking into. The one thing that Republicans beat us in is a lot of media, and we can't lay down to that. So we've been looking into not just radio media, but print media. A lot of the village elders, as I call them, when you go into communities of color, village elders still read the new old-fashioned newspaper, and we can't give that up. And so we need to invest heavily more in there, and that's what we're trying to do. We had actually 4 Latina officers that actually worked together right before one of them got elected to school board. But they were working with Telemundo. They were working with a lot of the Latin media to actually get more of that information out there. So it's been a very, very a very priority goal for us, is to, especially with our growing Latin population, to drive that information and education out. So that is one of the top priorities of ours.
Donna Brazil.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your presentation. Next time you want company, just call me and I'll come up there and sit with you. I love Colorado. I get my second wind. And sometimes I get the wind kicked out of me when I visit you. But I thank God for Wellington Webb and his wife Wilma Webb and so many people who put Colorado on the map for black people. I didn't think black people ever wanted to go that high and come down so low. But things change, and Leah, thank you for a great convention in 2008. But I want to go back to the voting system, and I know the mail system, you all, like Oregon and Washington State, I mean, how long is the early voting process? And can you clarify, Frank is always my second lawyer since David's not here. He'll be my first today. But how long does it take to count these votes? And secondly, for people who vote that day, you're saying everybody's included in several results that are given throughout that day. I just want to know, we've never had an early state that had all voting by mail, or majority of its citizens voting by mail, although as you mentioned, there's a small percentage of residents who go to the polls. I just wanted to get more clarification on that. And also, one last thing, your governor in this statement, and I like your governor, he's a good man, a strong leader as well. He said, Governor Paulus, he said, Colorado is the perfect host for an early nominating contest. And he also said that you all have the best voting rights protections in the country. So can you highlight just a few and let us know what makes your state so good when it comes to voter protection for eligible citizens as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've highlighted some of it. So number one, I want to take you through the process that you asked. You said, how long does it take? It's usually the ballots drop more than about 3.5 weeks before the actual day of the vote. So usually it gets into your mail within 3 weeks of the actual voter day. So for instance, our primaries this month is June 28th. It got mailed out 3 weeks before that, on the Monday, the 3 weeks before the election. So it takes about you usually have it about just above or under 3 weeks, depending on how the mail service is and how reliable it is in your area. So it gives you an ample amount of time to do that. Second, on the counting, they count the ones that are dropped off first.
Okay.
Because they have all that stuff, because they have all the, you actually have to have a voter signature on file. And a lot of that, they'll have processed that and said, hey, your signature matches. And then so you're ready to go. So when they have that on election day, they have those batches ready to be entered into counting machines. And they're very securely watched with more than 1,000 feet distance from anybody to be able to tamper with that. So our voter protection that you wanted to talk about, we provide, Jenna Griswold has done such a great job of not only putting these ballots out there and not only ensuring that these things are all the signatures are matching. There's no ID requirements. There is no tampering. There's evidence of tampering is taken very seriously. They double check everything. There's machines, I don't know if you heard, but we've had tampering from Tina Peters, who's actually running right now, and we've had that audit put in immediately. She actually worked with a Republican former Secretary of State to actually seize that machine bar them from actually ever touching that voting machine equipment again, and then to get that audited by different independent auditing systems. So we do an amazing job of taking care of our votes. The security of it, most people actually don't even mail it. Most people actually use a Dropbox, which is all videoed. So everything that we do in our Dropboxes have a video, and you can't have electioneering obviously within 100 feet of those, but they're all monitored and they're secured. I feel like we're the most secured voting system in the country. And then, like you said, the people can go in the last minute. Majority of those people are people who don't have time to sit at the kitchen table and fill out the ballot, but then they go to the polls, and those are usually counted at the end. So we have races that if they are within 1 point, you may not know till the day after, but they're generally quick. So a city the size of Aurora, which is about 380,000 people, and I believe the voter base is just about 53% of that. And if I'm correct on my memory, it took that to be counted within, majority of the mail-in was counted within 24 hours, and then the remaining trickled down within the next 2 days. So it's fairly fast and fairly efficient. Our systems have never shown an error. We have less than 0.01 error rate within our counting machines. So I think I feel very confident that we have the most accurate system in the country.
Okay, thank you. We are out of time, and I'm going to ask Brian if he could follow up with you afterwards on his question. Thank you for an excellent presentation. Thank you
so much. Thank you for having me here.
So I'm going to ask all of the members to stay in your seats because we need to start immediately on the next presentation.
So we will.
Yep.
So New Hampshire is coming into the room. Looks like they are full of goodie bags. Awesome. Okay. Our next we have our illustrious senators entering the room. New Hampshire has entered the room. Oh my.
Senators are ready to vote, so I think we should.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know that they have thrown the committee off a little bit with the goodie bags, but we are going to get started because we have our senators here, and I believe that they're voting right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you can look in your goodie bags a little later. Sorry, you all. You can see they get very excited about trinkets. So welcome to our senators. We are grateful to have you. Thank you for your service, especially in this climate. We really thank you for being present, and we know you have to go back and do God's work. So we will turn the floor over to you now. And we'll ask the committee to put their bags down because they obviously love what you have put into it.
Microphone.
This high-tech microphone. Co-Chair Roosevelt, very nice to see you both this evening and all the members of the committee. I'm Jean Shaheen. I am the senior senator. I like to describe that as the longest-serving senator from New Hampshire, although I'm also the senior senator. But I'm very pleased to be before the committee this evening to talk about our first in the nation primary in New Hampshire. In 1916, New Hampshire held the first presidential primary in the country, empowering voters to participate in the nomination process for their chosen presidential candidates. For over 100 years, New Hampshire voters have been entrusted with the critical responsibility of hosting the first in the nation primary, and we continue to do so with great success and pride. Our culture of civic participation and direct democracy defines who we are in New Hampshire. Every 2 years, nearly every state and local office is up for re-election, from our governor's office to our state senate, to our 400-member House of Representatives, and over 4,000 local offices. It is this unique culture of New Hampshire politics that offers presidential candidates, regardless of their national profile or campaign war chest, the opportunity to spend time in the Granite State, hit the campaign trail, and meet voters where they are. This requires candidates to roll up their sleeves, get into the details of their policies, and earn the support of each New Hampshire voter in order to succeed. The size of our state makes this level of voter engagement possible, and the accessibility of our media market levels the playing field for all candidates, regardless of money or experience. New Hampshire's emphasis on grassroots organizing and meeting candidates in person makes running for office possible. Unfortunately, recently the Republican Party has announced that they plan to keep their party's presidential selection calendar unchanged. I say unfortunate because consequently, we're seeing a growing narrative that blames Democrats for jeopardizing New Hampshire's first in the nation status. With such a tight Senate race and newly drawn congressional maps, I fear stripping New Hampshire of its long-held position could be consequential. New Hampshire is the very definition of a battleground state. Our electorate is engaged, informed, and free-thinking. Granite Staters expertly assess candidates and rely on their interactions with a campaign to make voting decisions. As a party, I believe we should continue to invest our resources in swing states like New Hampshire that truly could go either way. My husband Billy and I first got involved in politics in 1975, working for a little-known Southern governor, Jimmy Carter. We were drawn to the endless possibilities that our state's accessible process offered, and the chance to jump into the political arena to passionately back a candidate we fiercely believed in. Every cycle, the next generation of organizers in New Hampshire answers the call to enter politics because they too are inspired by the history and hope for our future that the New Hampshire primary offers. From our earliest days, New Hampshire has helped build American democracy, and we humbly ask you today to keep that tradition alive by supporting our first in the nation primary. Thank you all.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Senator Maggie Hassan, the more junior senator.
Younger, smarter.
No, partner, I'm very grateful for the remarks that Senator Shaheen just made. To the members of the committee, it is a real privilege to be here with you and to discuss why the New Hampshire presidential primary is essential to keeping our party, our democracy, and our country strong. More than 100 years ago, Granite Staters took the process of choosing presidential candidates out of the back rooms and gave that power and responsibility directly to the people. That's how the first in the nation primary began. And Granite Staters still take their role very seriously, reaffirming every 4 years the fundamental belief that it is the responsibility of the people, not the well-connected few, to choose who will lead them. This deep commitment to a citizen-led democracy is at the core of who we are in New Hampshire. The kind of person-to-person campaigning that our elections demand is part of what makes New Hampshire special. At every level of government, from president to town selectman, Granite Staters give each candidate a serious look. I won my last race by 1,017 votes, and let me be very clear, you cannot win a race in New Hampshire without speaking directly to voters and listening and absorbing their concerns. You also cannot win without appealing to swing voters. New Hampshire is a very purple state. The New Hampshire House of Representatives has flipped 5 times in the past 12 years. In 2020, even as Democrats won federal offices, Republicans won the governor's race and flipped the New Hampshire legislature. As someone who has never had an easy race, I believe that it is essential that our party's nominee learn to compete and win voters in a swing state like New Hampshire. The New Hampshire primary is also crucial in placing a national spotlight on the challenges that are too often ignored in America. The campaign events that define our primary are open to people from all walks of life and political persuasions. Everyone has access to presidential candidates, and the events aren't choreographed or controlled. The result is that Granite Staters have the opportunity to raise deeply personal issues directly with the next President of the United States. During the 2016 New Hampshire primary, Granite Staters spoke directly to presidential candidates about how the substance misuse crisis had devastated their neighbors, their families, and even their own lives. The stories Granite Staters told were not unique to our state. They were the stories of far too many communities across our country and far too many stigmatized and marginalized people. The 2016 New Hampshire primary forced the women and men running for president to listen directly to those who had been devastated by addiction and tell them what they would do to finally address this crisis. Only in New Hampshire, where candidates are forced to leave their bubble, look voters in the eye, and engage directly with them, could such a vital national conversation begin. New Hampshire's first in the nation primary forces candidates to talk to and listen to voters directly, making better candidates and making better presidents. By putting voters first, not TV ads or donors, New Hampshire's first in the nation primary continues to ensure that the people have a voice in choosing their president. I strongly urge the Democratic National Committee to support New Hampshire remaining as the first in the nation primary to help keep our party and our democracy strong. And now I'd like to pass it over to my friend Joanne Dodell.
Well, there we go. Thank you. I'm Joanne Dowdell, and good evening, fellow RBC members. As someone who has spent most of my political life in New Hampshire politics, one of the things I have marveled at is how the New Hampshire Democratic Party consistently works to lift up the voices of diverse communities. We do this because we know how important it is to have everyone involved in building our democracy. In fact, I chaired a committee to expand representation on the state committee. Today, we have a process that gives each constituent caucus, fashioned after the DNC structure, 5-member seats on the state committee. Now, we have just heard from New Hampshire's great senators, who I might mention are the first and second women to serve as governor and senator in U.S. history. They explained how our state allows people to interact directly with candidates and how that makes our party's candidates for president stronger. Now I want to talk about the people these candidates interact with. In New Hampshire, candidates and their surrogates can reach out to, interact with, and build effective campaign strategies around their engagement with the many diverse and different voters they have the pleasure of meeting, most often face-to-face in someone's living room, backyard, or in a coffee shop. The face of New Hampshire is changing. Between 2010 and 2020, our white population has declined almost 2%, and our racial and ethnically diverse populations have increased by 74%, including a 62% increase in Latin and Hispanic residents and a 52% increase in African American residents. Now, nearly 13% of our state is diverse, and those numbers are only going to increase in coming years as more than 20% of our racial and ethnically diverse children become eligible voters. In our larger cities like Manchester and Nashua, you find the largest proportion of diverse resident populations. Both of these communities are comprised of 25% Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. In cities like Concord, candidates will find the 11% of our state's workers who are represented by unions. And overall, 10% of our workers belong to a union. These numbers match what the country looks like as a whole. Along our southern border and the seacoast, in communities like Rochester, Portsmouth, and Salem, you find exurban and suburban voters that mirror the voters in the very areas that decided the 2020 general election for Joe Biden. In places like Hanover, Plymouth, Dover, and Keene, you find communities of college students and highly educated voters. Communities we must win if we are to be successful. In the North Country, in communities like North Conway, you will find rural voters who, like in other parts of the country, have felt left out of the Democratic Party in recent years, especially after factory jobs disappeared over the last 50 years. These areas give candidates a chance to develop strategies to bring communities like these across the country back into the Democratic column. These are a few examples of the diversity of voters you will find in New Hampshire. Our primary helps lift up diverse voices and creates pathways of opportunity that are only found in states like New Hampshire. For example, Manny Espedia came to New Hampshire to work on a presidential campaign in 2016, and today is the third highest ranking Democrat in the state house. Josh Query got their start in politics when they were recruited to volunteer for Hillary Clinton's campaign on a sidewalk in Manchester. They were elected to the state house in 2018 and became one of the first non-binary legislators in the country in 2019. These stories are possible because of the culture of retail politics in New Hampshire. Our process gives voice to people and communities that can be overlooked in our political system. The New Hampshire primary and the culture of political engagement it helps create makes our candidates stronger. If it wasn't for the primary and the opportunity it gave me to get politically active, I would not be part of this committee today. I ask my fellow committee members to give the next generation of diverse voices the same opportunities I and so many people have had by keeping New Hampshire's primary first. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and now I will turn it over to my friend, Chairman Raymond Buckley.
Could the co-chairs let me know what, do I have a minute? And Senators, thank you for joining us. I'm Ray Buckley, Chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, and it's great to be back among many of my former colleagues and friends on the DNC. New Hampshire is uniquely positioned to host the First in the Nation primary. As we have heard before, our culture of retail politics means that it doesn't matter how much money you have or how well known you are. You get a fair shot in New Hampshire. But beyond that, our small size, infrastructure, media market, and proximity to larger areas given any campaign a chance of success. New Hampshire is the 7th smallest state in the country with 75% of the population concentrated in 4 contiguous counties, all in the southeast corner of the state. Presidential primary candidates can make very efficient use of their time and resources in New Hampshire. Because of the state's size and population density, multiple campaign events in varying parts of the state can be held in one day. Additionally, our convenient first-class airport in Manchester has nonstop daily flights to several major airports across the country and is located near our major highways, meaning that a candidate can board a morning flight from Washington, land, do several events from the North Country to the Massachusetts border, and maybe even stop by the legendary Red Arrow Diner and be back in Washington that night. Additionally, we have only one TV station covering the state, WMUR. This means that a candidate doesn't have to spend their entire time raising buckets of money to get statewide TV coverage. Rather, they can spend their time doing what they should be doing, talking to voters. And when primary day comes, candidates can take comfort in knowing that the results will be accurate and timely. For instance, in 2020, the AP was able to declare the winner of New Hampshire within 3 hours and 42 minutes and 5 seconds of polls closing in a race that was decided by just 3,900 votes. We have held presidential primaries for over 100 years, and not once have we had any reporting issues. Our citizen-led bipartisan election process consistently delivers accurate results quickly. The New Hampshire primary also has spillover effect, helping to build infrastructure in the other states in the Northeast region. There are 6 states within a 2-hour drive of New Hampshire, and each presidential cycle, presidential campaigns recruit volunteers from these states to come and volunteer. This creates active volunteers in these states and helps build their state parties. We work with our Northeast neighbors to provide opportunities with the candidates, and voters from our sister states are able to come and attend town hall meetings and meet the candidates one-on-one. Since our beginnings, New Hampshire has led the way in building many of the democratic institutions we all take for granted. For more than 100 years, our political process and our growing diverse populations, our culture of political engagement, and most importantly, our people have made presidential candidates stronger and better for the campaign that follows. At a time when so many of our democratic institutions are under threat, taking away the New Hampshire primary would eliminate one of the last places where true grassroots participatory democracy exists, where the people and those who seek to lead them meet one-on-one. That's why we humbly ask that you keep New Hampshire's first in the nation primary status. And I'm joined here for the question and answer part, our DNC member and Senate Minority Leader, Democratic Leader, Senator Donna Soucy, and Jack Tremelin, our Data Director, if there's any specific questions. And we are there.
Exactly in time.
Who is that? 2 seconds.
I have stern bosses.
So do we have any questions from the committee? Don't all raise your hands at one time. Okay, Elaine?
Yeah. Hello, Senator. Nice to see you here. Nice to see you here. In a lot of states, they want to be first because the elected officials want to be first. The political class wants to be first. I get the impression that in New Hampshire, the desire to be first and the interest in being first goes farther than the political class. I've been up there a lot campaigning, and I've been amazed at how seriously New Hampshire voters take this role. Can you talk a little bit about the average New Hampshire voter and what their relationship is to the first in the nation primary?
I think that's a really good point, Elaine. And Maggie and I both talked about the number of elections we have in New Hampshire. Everybody except United States senators run every 2 years. We have town meeting we have 13 cities and everybody else has a town meeting. So we have almost 200 communities that have town meeting every year. And I think there is a level of engagement that I have been interested in talking to both candidates and reporters who cover the New Hampshire primary, who talk about just that issue, about what a difference the voters in New Hampshire make and how engaged they are. And we have the old, which I'm not going to get correct, about the reporters, the Boston Globe reporter stops and asked Joe Smith on the corner how he likes John McCain, and he says, well, I don't know, I've only met him twice. And yes, it did, probably. But there is that aspect of people really take their responsibility seriously, and they feel like it's important. On the Democratic side, I can tell you, people go to every Democratic candidate who's running before they make a decision. And I'm sure that that's the case across the board. And independents in New Hampshire can vote in the Democratic primary, and they can then become independents again. So it really encourages independents to think about voting in the primary.
And Elaine, thank you for the question. I would just add that, we are a state of a citizen legislature. I think you probably all know we have 400 members of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, 24 state senators, an executive council that acts in theory as a check on the governor, all of these are elected seats. All of the legislators earn $100 a year. So the sense of volunteerism.
That's not entirely true, Maggie.
Oh.
The Senate President and the Speaker of the
The House earn
get-
$125
That's
a
right.
year, that's correct. That is set in our state constitution from 1888, when they capped the pay legislators could get. But the point here is that people don't wait for other people to run for office in New Hampshire. We take it upon ourselves. Somebody needs to serve, and somebody needs to do the work, and somebody needs to engage in whatever problem solving has to happen at the legislative and governing level. And that makes for a citizenry that when candidates come to town, they know something about how you go about solving problems in a very purple state, where you air your disagreements, but then you move forward and find a way to solve them. And I think it really makes the primary process a particularly important and engaging one for candidates, because they are talking often with people who've taken their turn, whether it's a state legislative role or on any number of local commissions or committees or select boards. Ms. Daughtry?
Good afternoon, Senators and my colleagues from New Hampshire. Thank you for being with us today. I am a daughter of Dartmouth, and I spend a fair amount of time in New Hampshire. And so I can testify that, yes, you can go from Washington to New Hampshire through Manchester in one day. But I want to ask you, as the party is thinking about the diversity of our party and how the first contests represent the broad depth and breadth of who is part of our party, I want to ask you to make the case for New Hampshire being first, as opposed to New Hampshire being second or third. Does it make a material difference where you are in the early state lineup? Given what you said about the retail politics, just share with us why you think first is the position as opposed to second or third or fourth.
I think your mic's on.
Let's do that. I think it's really important because of the one-on-one conversations that occur in a small state like New Hampshire. It's different. And New Hampshire is rapidly changing. We have, each county elects its own sheriff. Cheshire County's sheriff is Eli Rivera, Latino. The Stratford County sheriff is Mark Brave, African American. We are electing a woman to the executive, African American woman for the executive council this year. And we have rapidly empowered our communities. While they might not be large yet in population, their ability to have serious, I don't know if you saw that great story about Carlos Cardona, who was Laconia City Chair, a young gay Puerto Rican guy, married with 2 kids, and the Washington Post did a story about how did this guy become a powerhouse? But he was able to bring the direct issues that he was concerned with, Puerto Rico and other issues, right directly with the candidates, because he was able to meet one-on-one with each of the candidates. And you go to a larger state, and as head of the ASTC for those 8 years, I traveled around and I saw how some voters interacted like they were rock stars, where in New Hampshire, as many of you know, we go, oh yeah? And then we try to think of what the toughest question we can ask them is. There's a real quantitative difference in our commitment to giving everybody a fair shot. I'm absolutely committed to that as state chair, and you can, there is a presidential campaign that no matter if they were the person that had the least amount of money or the front runners, that didn't say they were treated fairly by the party. And that's critically important to be at the beginning, because it allows everyone to flourish, to be part of it, and really be respected. And we help set up their first trip. We make sure that they've got whatever tools that they need to begin their campaign. It doesn't matter if they have 10,000 in their bank account or 100 million in their bank account. we want everyone, and it was a challenge this last time when I think there were around 46 people at one point or another came by, said they were thinking about running for president. But we treated each one of them equally and with respect. And that's what really has to be fair. And I'm not saying every state party isn't able to do that, but we do it really well.
First of all, it's good to see all of you. Senator, I'll never forget in 2016, I think it was like the weekend of October 8th, 9th, and 10th, we were in Nashville together, campaigning with Bernie Sanders. That was fun. Yeah. They didn't really come for me. They came for you, but they were there for Bernie, so it was really good. I love New Hampshire because what you lack in diversity, you've always made it up in common decency and civic engagement. And quite honestly, I own all of my winter coats because I visited that state so many times. But my question, Senator Shaheen, I go back with your husband and Dan Caligari, and I'm going to stop there because I can't talk about what we do when I come up. It's all good. It's legal, and it's good. And that's because I am part Black Irish, so I can get down with those brothers. But I want to ask you a very important question about SB 418, I believe, and some of the restrictions that some of the Republicans are trying. You guys used to be the gold standard, and the Republicans are now trying to, put restrictions on your same-day registration, and you've won some battles with them with some of the other restrictions on young people, but can you tell us where you stand today on some of these new restrictions that the governor and others are trying to implement? And thank you.
Sure, why don't I take a first pass at it, because it was introduced in the Senate. The bill was scaled down considerably from what had been originally proposed, but what it would do would require a further verification of voters. It would not preclude anyone from casting their vote, but it would segregate that vote and it would be counted separately. And the concerns raised by both the Senate and the House, I think this bill, without question, will fail to meet constitutional muster. It has already been challenged in court, both state and federal court. I have no doubt that we are going to prevail. At the very least, I can tell you there's no question that the court will likely ensure that it does not go into effect until there's a full ruling. So I don't think it will have an impact on this election cycle. But it's, the margins in our legislature, although we don't control either chamber, our margins are so very close that in this next election cycle, there's no question that that would be reversed before it could have any adverse impact.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senators Johnson, you are two of the greatest advocates for Puerto Rico, so I must start by saying that thank you both. And you adhere to the plan to increase the Senate majority by getting 2 senators from Puerto Rico and 2 senators from the District of Columbia. So I thank you for those efforts. But I'd like to, first of all, commend you all for a great presentation. And I have to say that, otherwise Raymond will beat me up. But I really mean it. You mentioned the growth of the Latino population in New Hampshire. It's a very impressive number. How do you communicate with that growing population? You've got one television station. It's certainly not Telemundo or Univision. And how do you reach that voter and get them to the polls and have them participate in what is a growing, you're making an effort to grow your diversity, clearly by your presentation. Joanne?
I'll take a cut at that. One of the things that we have done at the party is to really engage our constituent caucuses. So to speak specifically to our Latino and Hispanic community, we have special training that we offer for each constituent group. They are extraordinarily engaged not only in the outreach within their communities, but also working with the young Democrats and reaching out to students at our universities, looking at our seniors and our veterans, and really trying to expand. One of the things that I think I find has set us apart is our ability year in, year out to grow the party. And that is a very specific strategy that has been implemented in the party for decades, but really, I would say in the last 10 years, we have made extraordinary strides. And it's not only the Latino and Hispanic community, but also other communities of color, and those communities really that have otherwise been disenfranchised. I think you have to look at the opportunity to lift the voices and to give people voice where they may not otherwise have a voice. The New Hampshire Democratic Party does that.
I would like to add just the fact that the congressional delegation, the way I engage with the Latino community, with the LGBTQ community, with the African American community in New Hampshire, is to speak to the policies that they care about. With labor, it's to try and vote in a way that's going to improve the lives of our citizens. And I think that's the most important language we can use. The most important way we can communicate with our constituents is to speak to the things they care about, whether that's housing or food security or human rights concerns. But that's the way we engage, and I can tell you the federal delegation and the Democratic Party are in the same place on those issues. We have a unified message in speaking to those communities.
And I would just add that when it comes to this cycle with my campaign and our grassroots organization, we started our grassroots and voter protection program last August. That is the earliest that any Senate campaign has ever started a grassroots program in New Hampshire. We have 30 paid organizers on the ground as we speak. We have been doing deep canvassing for a while, along with a really strong voter protection program to make sure that, for instance, our voters who may have read about various attempts to suppress the vote understand fully that almost all of the bills that the Republicans have tried to pass and tried to impose on people have been held unconstitutional or otherwise disallowed by the courts. And we continue to have just rigorous engagement and again, reach into these constituency groups to build the organizing capacity in every community with every constituency group. And it's been going very well, and the grassroots program, which we do in conjunction, of course, with the party, has been growing, and it will be there for candidates up and down the ticket.
Molly, Mo.
Good evening, Senators, and thanks to you all for a wonderful presentation. As a Dartmouth grad, I always enjoyed coming up to your beautiful state. My question, our governor as well went to Dartmouth grad. Question more for the party leadership around the voter file access. And do you have a different pricing structure between what the presidential candidates have to pay and the statewide candidates? Again, most of our work here is for the presidential campaigns, but obviously, as you all pointed out, we have to be cognizant of potential spillover effects from the work that we do here.
Sure. You know, I've been around long enough to know that when a candidate used to come by the state party office and say that they're running for office, they say, good luck. We have invested literally millions of dollars over the years working with the DNC as well to build a voter file that all of our candidates have full access to. And our agreement might be a little, I'm not familiar with the agreement of the other early states, exactly how theirs work, but ours is you give us a $5,000 check and sign an agreement, and we create a payment plan around that. So that everyone instantly has access to the voter file. We charge a little extra during the presidential because we add on additional staff, because some of these campaigns don't have a large number of data professionals. And so we have to be able to provide services to their campaigns. We offer free trainings to all of the campaigns on how to utilize the van, and we provide that to every activist, volunteers, everyone. And by having that additional staff, that means that if two campaigns call at the same time, there are two, we can handle it, and it gets resolved very quickly. We are grateful that we can provide that service, that information, that opportunity for the candidates. Not to age myself, but I remember the days where the first 6 months of a presidential campaign, you just traveled from house to house of the supervisor of the checklist, and you, with 3x5 cards, you sit at their dining room table and hand copy, and then you brought the cards back to the office. I'm dating myself for the Jimmy Carter campaign, but and then you had to look it up in the phone book. And now you come by and they have instant access to the amount of data that we provide the candidates on the background and the experiences, who had a yard sign, who was a delegate to the state convention 10 years ago, who had donated $5, all that sort of data that we provide is readily accessible to all of the candidates.
Thank you. I am not a Dartmouth grad, but as a veteran of several New Hampshire primary campaigns, I want to thank you for allowing me to add to my collection of Red Arrow Diner mugs. I have two questions, if I may. The first one's super short. You talked about the TV market and WMUR, but we all know that candidates often spend money on Boston TV. What percentage would you say of candidate expenditures are spent in the Boston market versus WMUR?
Well, I'll start. I don't have percentages for you, and maybe our party folks do, but you can reach every household in New Hampshire through WMUR, and that is unique to our state. I am obviously running a very competitive Senate race, and I have to, and the voters I'm trying to reach are not necessarily voters who would come to the polls in a non-presidential primary. We're talking about the presidential primary here. MUR takes its responsibility here as seriously as all Granite Staters do. So people know if they want to know about the candidates in the primary, they can watch MUR, they will get full coverage, they will see debates, they will see interviews, and events will be covered. In my race, I am trying to make sure that I am covering every single base and looking at margins that are really, really slender in our very purple state. So yes, I'm going to spend in Boston because I need to make sure I'm reaching every single person in such a competitive race. But I am very confident that if I were just to advertise on MUR, I would get into every household. I think the dynamic within the primary means that really it's about MUR spending and coverage. Some people are going to spend and buy ads on it. Other people are going to rely just on the coverage of the grassroots events they do, and on the debates, and on the interviews that MUR does. And that's going to give a lot of Granite Staters a lot of information, even if the candidate doesn't have a lot of money to spend.
Thanks. My second question, look, I love the New Hampshire primary. We are here because we have said as a body that we don't want to rest on tradition this year, that we want to make this decision based on merit. Now, I think you have made actually a very compelling case based on the merit. But having said that, I do worry that whether it is this year or in a future year, if this body were to decide based on the merit to shift New Hampshire's order in the process, that the state law mandating it be first in the nation would create a level of chaos throw the whole process into people. We've seen it before. I remember, the Iowa caucus in 2008 being like the day after New Year's, I think, because of this cascading process. And so I'm wondering, should we choose to shift the order, how the state party might choose to handle that given the state law.
That's a little bit like asking which sister do I want to keep alive and which one. Obviously, our responsibility, and as you will read in the pamphlet, we have a long history with the Democratic Party, starting from its very early days. But ultimately, our responsibility is to the people of New Hampshire. And I think most of my entire life I've been a very proud Democrat, but I'm a prouder Granite Stater. And so while we can do what we can to be supportive and adjust, at the end of the day, the state law isn't something that the people of New Hampshire would allow to be changed. It's just something so much part of the culture. It is so much part of the DNA of the state of New Hampshire. So, I mean, we've been around where we've tried to do different adjustments, and we've done that. We'll continue to try to make everything as open and as fair. But we would not have the power we don't have the power to tell the Secretary of State not to schedule the primary. So they're going to schedule the primary. So we have to make the best of it. But wouldn't we rather just not even have to deal with any of that?
Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry, Frank. Frank, and then Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Senator Hassan, for your early attention to voter protection. That's really critical. I was going to ask a question similar to the one that was just asked, and I guess I'm a little confused. You want to be first in the country, but for the last 50 years, you've been second to Iowa. It's a caucus, but nowadays, how is that much different? Or if Iowa went ahead for a primary, why would that be any different? It's still not clear to me why you guys have to be number one as opposed to early. And secondly, of course, as you know, the DNC gets to adopt its rules, and the state party's role would be to take provable positive steps to change the legislation if it conflicted with the party's rules. But why number one as opposed to number two? Thank you.
Well, the way New Hampshire's law reads, and it is that way because that's the way it was created back in 1913 when Stephen Bullock introduced the legislation to allow voters to vote directly on their presidential preference, and then it was enacted in 1916. The law says any similar or like contest. So the Iowa caucuses are not a primary, and I'm sorry, I can't tell where you're from.
Frankly, I'm from Virginia, but now from DC.
Okay. Well, if you participated in a caucus state and a primary state, you know that they are two very different contests, that they are not the same kind of contest. And so I think that is the difference in our state law in terms of the primary being the first in the nation primary. Now, I recognize that under legal ruling that the party has the authority to govern party contests. So I assume if the party decided to eliminate the New Hampshire primary or to move it around, the Democratic Party would try and accommodate that. But as Chairman Buckley has said, we would still have a state law in New Hampshire that would affect the New Hampshire primary in a way that I think it would be difficult for the Democrats in the legislature to change. So, and you know, I'm old enough to have been around even longer than Chairman Buckley. And as I said, I got involved in 1975 in the Democratic presidential primary when Jimmy Carter won, but I was also involved in 1984 when, as Elaine remembers, Walter Mondale and Gary Hart and others participated in that, and the party looked very directly at how to rearrange the presidential selection process and the calendar at that time, and came to the conclusion that it did not make sense to move the New Hampshire primary because of the history, the culture, the candidates, and the media, all of whom participated very directly in the New Hampshire primary, and appreciated the opportunity to do that and to be heard.
Yes. So thanks to you all for engaging in this discussion. And I have a question which, I have a brief comment and then a question which could be answered by other members of, other than the senators, if you need to get back to vote.
We don't know if they called the vote yet.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for being here. It's great to see you both again. My comment is the media, including the New Hampshire media, has taken what we are doing here as a potential assault on the order that has operated for many years. They ignore the fact that we have this discussion every 4 years. So there is nothing different in our process this year. So that's just, there may be other factors going on, but it's not that we've decided to target particular states. We do this every 4 years. They just never paid attention before. My question is, the legendary Secretary of State in New Hampshire is retiring. He's already retired, okay. So you know who the new Secretary of State is, at least for the time being. And my question is, how do you think the election by the legislature of a new Secretary of State will affect the reliability of the process in New Hampshire?
As we have a national concern about what's going to happen post-2024. And we have a very real concern. New Hampshire is always a battleground state, always very close. And if the Republicans achieve a supermajority in the House, the Senate, and they elect a Trump-like character to the Secretary, we could see them behaving in a manner very similar to what we saw regarding January 6th and the electoral process. So we are focused fully on making sure that we re-win our majorities. The Secretary of State currently was the Deputy Secretary of State for 20 years, with the Democrat as the Secretary of State, Republican as the Deputy. Currently, this new Republican Secretary of State, oddly, picked an incumbent Republican state senator to become his deputy. So we are very concerned. And that's why, Senator Soucy is working overtime and to regain her majority, her presidency of the Senate. And we only lost the House by a grand total, I believe it was, how much? 700 votes statewide. It was, razor thin losses in the House and the Senate this last time. But I don't know if you want to speak to the election.
Well, I would just say, to be clear, the Secretary of State in New Hampshire is elected by the legislature. When we convene, one of our responsibilities is to elect 2 constitutional officers, one the Secretary of State, the other the Treasurer. So obviously it makes a lot of, it's critical that we reclaim those majorities and that we have a say in who the Secretary of State is. And it's been, our previous Secretary of State, Secretary Gardner, had served for so long, the longest serving in the country, that there really hadn't been turnover and change. So I think we want to ensure, as legislators, that we do elect a Secretary of State that's observant of not only our traditions, but is also mindful of the advances that we need to make and the important work we need to continue to do to allow greater participation in our process.
I think we're about to close out, but Maria has a question, and this will be the last question, and Jim will.
I think his hand was
Oh,
raised.
oops, sorry.
First.
Oh, now we're going into a whole nother swath, so we definitely have, we can get the questions to the panelists? Yeah, because we're about to open it up, and you'll be the last question, and we'll.
Good evening. Thank you, both senators, for the work that you do each and every day. I guess I'm reflective of conversation that you just had about a 1913, 1916 law that put in place. And I guess the work that this committee is doing now is reflective of how the nation has actually changed since that time period and where we are collectively. The demographics of the country and other things that are drastically changing, and looking at this early voting, who goes first, how this whole piece plays out. I guess the question that I've got for you, if you're not one, and you talk about the piece that potentially could change with regard to Secretary of State, there's already advocacy that's taking place with regard to the Republican Party in the state about when this race takes place. What's the true physical impact or momentum impact in the state by not being one and landing into another one of those seats for the primary?
Well, as I said in my opening statement, I think it will be very detrimental on the Senate race, on the congressional races, and on all of the down ballot races, because the Republican Party is already teeing up to blame Democrats for losing the first in the nation primary. And I appreciate what you're saying about the changing demographics in the country, and I think Joanne did a really good job of pointing out that those changing demographics are happening in New Hampshire too. But one of the things that I think it's important to point out, and I believe that I hope that one of the things that this committee is looking at is how do we encourage battleground states to be able to participate. And New Hampshire is one of those states where we have been able to win pretty consistently for the last 20 years as Democrats because of our grassroots organizing ability to get to voters. And that's the huge benefit, I think, of the New Hampshire primary. And we have been able to win consistently because we continue to engage with voters and because those voters are so engaged in the process.
And I think I would just add this. The reason we cite 1913 and 1916 isn't because we've been doing this a long time. It's because what we did in 1913 and 1916, we said the people get to choose their nominee. The people get the direct voice in elections, not the well-connected few, not the politicians in back rooms deciding things. We are at a pivotal time in our country's history where we are in a battle about whether this democracy is going to continue with an accountable government to the people. That's what, more than anything, this election is about. Are we going to continue to have a minority in Washington impose its views contrary to where the majority of Americans are? That's what's at stake here. Whether it is about standing up to big oil or standing up to big pharma or listening to the women of this country and representing them, this election is about whether people's voices matter. And the reason the New Hampshire primary got started was because we believe that people's voices matter no matter who you are, no matter what walk of life you are. There are very few other states where somebody in recovery for substance misuse disorder can walk up to the governor of their state or the United States senator of their state and say, this is what my life is like, or to a presidential candidate. That's the value here, is that New Hampshire is a place where people's voices matter. That's what's at stake for our country. That's been the strength of this primary, and that's why we merit staying first.
Well, thank you all for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it. If there are members who have other questions, I apologize that we have to cut off, but we could forward them to you if that would be all right. So thanks very much for this. We have come to the end of our agenda for today's meeting. Does anyone have any comments or questions before we conclude? Yes, Artie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know everybody's trying to move on to our dinner plans. I think a follow-up that in some of these applications may not be consistent is what are all the voting laws within each of the states? And I think that was going to be my question, which could totally be a follow-up in writing, is like, what are all the voting laws? What does it mean to register to vote? How is it easy? Same-day voter registration. So I think there's some inconsistencies that I would love to have clarification on that. But other than that, it's been great. Yes, thank you.
Andy, can you work with Artie to develop maybe a questionnaire that we can send to all of the states? Thank you. Okay.
And if possible, I just would like you to, I mean, again, it's since Shelby v. Holder and since the 2020 election, where we've seen numerous states change, even formerly progressive states change their voting laws. And I think we need to know how this impacts voters, because often it will impact minority and young voters and poor people. And we need to know. And I'm glad you brought it up, and if we have that, I'll probably take up less time.
I'm not going to hold you to that. Stuart, Stuart, did you
I
have-
would add one series of questions to the processes within the states, and that really relates to how the votes are going to be counted when they come in and when they're going to be counted. Because as I was listening today, I was hearing a discussion about how quickly the mail-in ballots will be counted in one presentation. And I'd be curious, for instance, I was told that in one state, a primary may be held on a Tuesday, but all votes are not required to be received until the Friday afterwards. And I think that's relevant as to whether or
District of
not.
Columbia would be one of those.
What's that?
DC is one of those.
Right. And I think it's relevant, I mean, to the question of whether or not we're going to get a result in what is a close race, and whether or not that is important to us.
And some states permit the preparation for the counting before the day of the actual polling, and some say they can't be opened until after the polls are closed, so it differs. Okay. All right, so we'll put that on our list as well. Thank you. Maria, did you want to add something?
I wanted to ask the New Hampshire delegation, and I thought they did a great job in presentation, but I still, the retail politics, the one-on-one, the making sure that every voter, no matter where they're from or where they live or what their background is, has the ability to ask a presidential candidate whatever they want on whatever policy. I don't think that will change if one or two states go before New Hampshire. So that seemed to be, continued to be the reason as to why they said they need to go first. To me, it doesn't seem like if one or two other states that better represent the diversity of this country go before them, that kind of retail politicking, I don't know why that would change if they don't go first. So that was going to be my question. And in fact, I would say if other states go first and let's say one presidential candidate wins one of those states and the voters of New Hampshire don't believe that that specific candidate has done what they need to do in their state, they're going to make a different decision. And that could completely make the race totally competitive and interesting, and they would still have a say the way that they do now. So that was going to be my question. I
think
didn't
that's an
hear anything
interesting
different.
point that maybe the committee
I
could
see
have
it
a
the
dinner.
same way.
We should probably take
I
this
don't
one up
see
at
it the
dinner.
same way. And I think the reason for that is because,
Yeah.
and I'm not advocating for any state, I'm nowhere yet on which state should go. But I think that we all know that the greater focus of the campaigns is on the initial states. And then the floodgates are opened after the first few states. And there isn't the focus and concentration on the latter states as there would be for the initial states. I'm not arguing for New Hampshire, but I think that is what they would be telling you.
Mr. Chair, just to.
So we will have other opportunities to continue this.
I just wanted to add really quick to that point. I think this experiment of what New Hampshire is able to benefit is a result of our the history and the tradition of retail politics. And so we get to look at other states to actually approach that level of democracy by the rules that we establish. And that is, I mean, what comes first, the chicken or the egg in that process? If you're able to have a larger influence in the process, hopefully more states could be New Hampshire. And I think that is an example, and I agree, it is a great example of democracy, the ability to talk to presidential candidates. Many states don't have that privilege.
Right.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Many good points. We'll continue them in our further discussions. And I'm just going to mention some logistics. The buses are going to be down at the same place. The bus is going to be down the same place that it dropped us off. Dinner is on the second floor of the hotel. Tomorrow morning, the bus will be at the same place for picking us up at 7
L Street, 7:15.
L Street at 7:15. I think that covers all the logistics. So I'd like to thank everybody for really great participation. Thank you to our staff, to the DNC team, to the DC Bar staff, to the AV technicians, and our designated our court reporter and our designated parliamentarian. Thank you. We'll stand in recess until 8 a.m. tomorrow.
Think I'm bringing blanket tomorrow. Be here all day.
Yes, yes.